Chapter 219. Ah! 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 Not far away, tragic cries could be heard. The blood-eyed crows that were initially circling in the skies flapped their wings and charged down with demonic chi, surrounding the people of Misty Peak and biting them repeatedly. Every single one of the blood-eyed crows was a Foundation establishment spirit demon. This was an extremely terrifying power that could not be ignored. Any Misty Peak disciple that was left alone would be devoured by the blood-eyed crows in the blink of an eye, leaving only their bones behind. Before long, there were only a few dozen Misty Peak disciples left. Apart from Su Zimo, all the disciples that were left alone were dead. The two legacy disciples, Qin Yu and Ji Chengtian, had wretched expressions as they roared and commanded at the top of their lungs. With their efforts, they gathered the dozens of disciples and used their flying swords, spirit arts and talismans to create a defensive barrier that temporarily blocked the blood-eyed crows outside. However, the difference in strength between the two sides was way too great. The blood-eyed crows were endless and covered the skies, charging at the defensive barrier formed by the Misty Peak disciples repeatedly. It was as though Qin Yu and the others were walking in a swamp, moving extremely slowly and sinking deeper. Before long, when Qin Yu and the others could no longer sustain their spirit chi or revealed any openings, the entire defensive barrier would shatter. The remaining dozens of people would also end up as food for the blood-eyed crows. This was a complete massacre. With Elder Chan and Feng Haoyu as spies, Blood Crow Palace had a clear understanding of the strength of the cultivators of Misty Peak and planned such a trap meticulously. Blood Crow Palace did not give the people of Misty Peak a chance at all. The blood-robed youth and the Jin Dan realm spirit demon behind him were still watching coldly from the sidelines and had yet to make a move. The moment the two of them made a move, the last hope of the people of Misty Peak would be extinguished as well. Today, apart from becoming the blood slaves of the blood-robed youth, none of the cultivators of Misty Peak would be able to leave this place alive. At that moment, the blood-robed youth looked at Su Zimo, who was killing in the crowd, and nodded repeatedly in satisfaction. Not bad, not bad. The blood-robed youth smiled. Only a cultivator as such is worthy of being my blood slave and fighting alongside me in the ancient battlefield. Young master, do you want me to capture this kid? The Jin Dan realm spirit demon Yu Fei, who was standing behind the blood-robed youth, lowered his head and asked with a cold expression. The blood-robed young man waved his hand and said with a smile, "Don't worry. Let's wait and see. I'm curious about Su Zimo's limit and how long he can last." On the battlefield, four perfected Foundation establishment cultivators stood side by side, blocking Su Zimo's path. Boom! 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 A series of sounds came from the bodies of the four people, and spirit meridians appeared on the surface of their bodies, shining through their Taoist robes. Two were at 1 Meridian Foundation establishment, one was at 2 Meridian Foundation establishment, and the last one was at 3 Meridian Foundation establishment. It was absurd for a cultivator with a spirit meridian to target a mid-stage Foundation establishment cultivator. But now, 4 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators stood out, and one of them was even at 3 Meridian Foundation establishment. The spirit energy of a cultivator with a single spirit meridian was far superior to Su Zimo, let alone a Foundation establishment cultivator with 3 meridians. In terms of strength, Su Zimo was definitely not a match for the four of them. Furthermore, the 4 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators had great teamwork, interweaving their spirit arts and flying swords to form a net that blocked Su Zimo's path. Su Zimo could not break through at all. Inhale. 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 All of a sudden, Su Zimo opened his mouth and took a deep breath. A huge gust of air tore at his throat, causing him to feel a faint stinging pain. Su Zimo's chest puffed up and the surrounding air was almost sucked dry by him. Anaconda eclipse. At the same time, Su Zimo's left thumb and middle finger interlocked, forming a strange hand seal as spirit energy circulated wildly. Although the fiend suppression seal was strong, it expended too much spirit energy. After using that move, Su Zimo had almost no spirit energy left, and that was the reason why he waited until now to release it. Fiend suppression seal. A gigantic golden palm descended from the skies. The patterns on the palm were clear and shone with a brilliant golden light. It tore through the thick fog and crushed many blood-eyed crows that passed by. The 4 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators narrowed their eyes and instantly sensed the power of that hand seal. However, the four of them were extremely calm. Given their eyesight, they could naturally tell that even though that hand seal was strong, Su Zimo had too little spirit energy in his body. He did not manage to release the true power of the Fiend Suppression Seal. Given their strength, they could break through the Fiend Suppression Seal with ease if they joined forces. Flying Immortal Art. Heaven Capital Fist. Silver Frost Break. Night Rush Finger. The four of them released their spirit arts at the same time and struck towards the golden palm that was descending from the skies. Right then, Su Zimo opened his mouth and roared. Kill! This voice was like a sudden clap of thunder, exploding in the crowd. The other cultivators paused for a moment. The four Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators at the front shuddered and the spirit energy in their hands almost dissipated. It was only natural that they could not release the full power of their spirit arts. That was Thunderclap Kill. It was unexpected and could release the power of sound instantly, causing the opponent to panic. In reality, Su Zimo was unable to release the true power of Thunderclap Kill at the moment due to the limitations of his physique. Rumble. Boom. The golden palm descended and collided against the four spirit arts. There was a series of loud bangs, but it was not destroyed immediately. Swash. A sword beam appeared strangely and pierced through the side of the four Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators with a cold killing intent. For spirit patterns shown on the sword. It was Su Zimo's supreme grade flying sword. In reality, when the Fiend Suppression Seal and Thunderclap Kill were released at the same time, Su Zimo's flying sword had already been released. The first two moves were merely his trump cards. His true killing move was the final flying sword. Poof! 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 There were 3 consecutive sounds. The necks of the 3 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators were pierced. Blood splattered. The 3 of them were terrified and clutched at their wounds with their hands. However, blood gushed out continuously and could not be stopped. The 3 of them felt their life force draining rapidly and their eyes dimmed. One had to know that this sword had not only pierced through the 3 men's throats, but the extremely sharp sword chi on the sword had also severed the 3 men's arteries. That was equivalent to severing their heads from their necks. Thump! The 3 of them fell to the ground one after another with widened eyes. Their bodies convulsed as blood flowed from beneath them, staining the ground red. Among the 4 of them, only the 3 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator managed to avoid the calamity. However, after that exchange, he was scared out of his wits and retreated to the side, looking at Su Zimo with a fearful gaze. If he had not experienced it personally, he would not have been able to imagine it. A mid-stage Foundation establishment cultivator was able to kill Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators with so many secret skills and killing moves. If such a person were to cultivate to the Foundation establishment Meridian opening realm, how terrifying would his battle prowess be? Chapter 220. Although the exchange between both parties seemed short, it was a clash of spirit arts, secret skills and psychological warfare. If it was a different battlefield and environment, Su Zimo might not have been able to win. Furthermore, after releasing the Fiend Suppression Seal, Su Zimo did not have much spirit energy left in his body. Right then, Su Zimo's scalp turned numb as a sense of danger surged in his heart. Su Zimo realized that he was targeted. Furthermore, that person was extremely strong and he could not resist at all. A Jin Dan realm expert. It could be the perfected Jin Dan that was fighting Wen Xian and Elder Yu in midair. It could also be the Jin Dan realm spirit demon beside the blood-robed youth. Su Zimo took a deep breath of air and tried his best to compose himself. Breaking through the encirclement, he sped all the way and arrived outside Qin Yu's group. Caw! Caw! Many blood-eyed crows let out unpleasant cries when they caught the scent of fresh flesh. Hundreds of them lunged towards Su Zimo. Those blood-eyed crows were spirit demons with strong physiques, and posed a great threat to Foundation establishment cultivators like Qin Yu. Qin Yu's group did not dare to let the blood-eyed crows get close to them. However, Su Zimo's physique was much stronger than those ordinary blood-eyed crows. No matter how many blood-eyed crows attacked him, they might not be able to hurt him. It was no exaggeration to say that although Su Zimo was a human, even the physique of ancient remnant beasts of the demon race could not compare to his. Compared to pure-blooded ferocious beasts, Su Zimo's physique and bloodline were superior as well. Su Zimo's expression was unchanged as he looked at the blood-eyed crows lunging over. The sound of tides rumbled from his body, accompanied by the roar of tigers and leopards and rumbling divine thunder. Splash! Rumble! Boom! Not only did such a strong bloodline not cause the blood-eyed crows to cower, they were even more ferocious and the blood glint in their eyes intensified. At that moment, Su Zimo was a delicious piece of nourishing flesh for the blood-eyed crows. The blood-eyed crows were merely ordinary demon beasts. How would they have the chance to devour the flesh of ancient remnant beasts and pure-blooded ferocious beasts? And the Su Zimo in front of him was a living, pure-blooded dire beast. As long as they could eat a piece of Su Zimo's flesh or drink a mouthful of Su Zimo's blood essence, their strength would increase significantly. Big brother! Little Fatty exclaimed when he saw this. However, this voice was cut apart by the countless blood-eyed crows and could not be transmitted out at all. Lung Ro's heart trembled and her eyes dimmed. They were well aware of how terrifying the blood-eyed crows were. None of the lone cultivators would be able to survive from being torn apart and devoured by these beasts. So what if Su Zimo was strong in close combat? After all, he was only a human, so how could he resist so many blood-eyed crows? Little Fatty, Lung Ro and the others could do nothing as they watched the blood-eyed crows swarm forward and drown Su Zimo's figure. Forget it. Lung Ro sighed internally and shook her head. They could not hold on much longer either. The resistance before them was nothing more than a momentary lapse of consciousness. Before long, they would end up in the same tragic state. Disheartened, Lung Ro turned her flying sword around and was prepared to commit suicide. She did not want to experience the process of being torn apart by the blood-eyed crows. She might as well kill herself. Right then, a strange sound came from the blood-eyed crows that surrounded Su Zimo not far away. Crackle! Endless lightning burst forth from Su Zimo's body in an incomparably bright manner. Snap! Thunder boomed. A gigantic bolt of lightning descended from the skies and connected with Su Zimo's body, not dissipating for a long time as though it was connected to heaven and earth. With Su Zimo as the center, a blinding lightning snake extended rapidly in all directions, surging wildly as though it was an ocean of lightning. The tide surged and engulfed all the blood-eyed crows around him. The power of lightning was one of the most terrifying types of energy. Furthermore, lightning was strong and yang in nature. It was the nemesis of evil beings like the blood-eyed crows. Engulfed by the ocean of lightning, many blood-eyed crows cried out tragically and fell from midair with smoke rising from their bodies. It was an extremely shocking scene. Be it the cultivators of Blood Crow Palace or the disciples of Misty Peak, all of them were dumbfounded with disbelief in their eyes. Lightning descended from the depths of the 9 heavens and descended upon Su Zimo's body. Su Zimo stood in the center of the ocean of lightning motionlessly like a divine being that was being baptized by lightning, looking down on the world and cleansing it of all evil. This was the wrath of lightning. Good, good, good. The blood-robed youth was the first to react as his eyes lit up. Instead of being angry, he laughed and nodded repeatedly without concealing the admiration in his eyes. However, there was a hint of fear and even jealousy in his eyes. Although he had learned the 3 secret skills of the sect, he did not know about this thunder art. The Jin Dan realm spirit demon Yu Fei had a calm expression with a cold gaze. No matter what methods Su Zimo had, it did not affect the current situation at all. The Jin Dan realm and Foundation Establishment realm were 2 completely different cultivation realms that could not be crossed at all. As long as he made a move, Su Zimo would not be able to resist at all. Good! A series of cheers broke out from the Misty Peak crowd. After Su Zimo's attack, the number of blood-eyed crows decreased rapidly and the pressure on Qin Yu and the others was greatly reduced. Su Zimo, I'll give you a chance to live. Become my blood slave. Right then the blood-robed youth walked towards Su Zimo in an unhurried manner. Although his tone was calm, there was an unquestionable power in it. Su Zimo turned around and his gaze paused momentarily on the blood-robed youth. The current situation was a sure-kill situation for everyone from Misty Peak. However, right then, Su Zimo vaguely sensed a chance of survival in this sure-kill situation. The blood-robed youth had an extremely high status and the Jin Dan realm spirit demon was by his side the entire time, guarding him like a shadow. If he could lure the blood-robed youth away, the Jin Dan realm spirit demon would definitely leave as well. That way the greatest threat to everyone from Misty Peak would be gone. Although there were still many blood-eyed crows and Foundation establishment cultivators left on the battlefield, the Misty Peak disciples might have a chance of escaping since both sides were at Foundation establishment realm. This was the only chance for everyone from Misty Peak. Although it was small, it was worth a shot. You think you have what it takes? Su Zimo looked at the blood-robed youth and scoffed coldly. Suddenly, he turned and sped out of Dongling Valley. Su Zimo exuded a powerful bloodline aura, and his departure attracted a large group of blood-eyed crows. Su Zimo was extremely fast. Even perfected Foundation establishment cultivators would not be able to catch up to him when he sped at full speed with Divine Steed fleeting. You're trying to escape? The blood-robed youth narrowed his gaze and withdrew a white bone staff from his storage bag. Leaping up, he stood on it and released spirit energy from his body. The light of spirit meridians flashed repeatedly on the blood-robed youth's body. 1, 2, 3. 4 spirit meridians. The blood-robed youth was at 4 Meridian Foundation establishment. Chapter 221. Once a 4 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator released his spirit energy, the speed of sword kinesis flight was rather shocking. The wind howled in his ears as the blood-robed youth stepped on his white bone staff and chased after Su Zimo, who was sprinting in the distance. After more than 10 breaths, the blood-robed youth was shocked to discover that even with his terrifying speed, he could not catch up to Su Zimo, who was sprinting on the ground. Even if he used his full strength, it was to no avail. At the very most, he could only ensure that Su Zimo would not shake him off. That man's physique is so strong that he possesses such explosive speed? The blood-robed youth already had a high opinion of Su Zimo, but now he realized that he had still underestimated this man. Right then, Yu Fei's voice sounded. That lad's bloodline is strong and he has already cultivated to the legendary Tsunami blood realm. His physique and bloodline are definitely not weaker than ancient remnant beasts. In fact, he might even be comparable to pure-blooded ferocious beasts. As a Jin Dan realm spirit demon, Yu Fei was naturally discerning. At that moment, he soared into the air with his hands behind his back and followed closely behind the blood-robed youth with a relaxed expression. Yu Fei, bring me to catch up to him. The blood-robed youth was indignant that he could not catch up to Su Zimo. His expression darkened and his voice was cold. All right, Yu Fei replied casually. In midair, Yu Fei's figure changed continuously. His body contorted, compressed in some places and twisted in others. His tendons and bones sounded like beans being fried. In the blink of an eye, Yu Fei had transformed into a gigantic blood-eyed crow. The blood-robed youth understood and leaped onto the blood crow that Yu Fei had transformed into. Although he was carrying a person, Yu Fei's speed increased exponentially, and he almost turned into a streak of light. So fast. Su Zimo turned back and was secretly shocked. The speed of a Jin Dan realm spirit demon was much faster than Su Zimo. Yu Fei arrived first with the blood-robed youth and arrived before Su Zimo before long, blocking his path. Yu Fei's body shook, and he returned to his human form. He followed behind the blood-robed youth with an indifferent expression. You can't escape. Looking at Su Zimo, who showed no signs of slowing down, the blood-robed youth sneered. He waved the white bone staff in his left hand and chanted a mysterious incantation. As the blood-robed youth chanted, 5 pitch-black skulls suddenly flew out of the white bone staff in his hand. They split into 5 different directions and charged towards Su Zimo. Before they even got close, the eyes of the 5 skulls suddenly emitted 2 blood-red rays of light, and a series of strange and eerie cries came from their mouths. Seeing this scene, Su Zimo's heart trembled. This method seemed to have exceeded the scope of spirit arts. The 5 skulls were emitting an evil aura that made one's hair stand on end. It was unknown just how much blood it had been stained with, and how many lives it had devoured to be able to refine such an evil thing. Su Zimo quickly calmed his mind. His eyes were cold, and his expression did not change. The situation before him was clear. Even if he retreated, he would not be able to escape death. If he chose to take them head-on, he might have a chance of taking one of them down with him. In the blink of an eye, the 5 skulls descended on Su Zimo's body, opening their mouths and biting down viciously. Boom! There was a deafening sound as the sound of tsunami and thunder echoed from Su Zimo's body. Incomparably blazing lightning shone on Su Zimo's body with a terrifying might. The pitch-black skulls were only slightly obstructed by the power of thunder, and their evil aura was reduced slightly. Breaking through the lightning barrier, they bit down on Su Zimo's flesh. How strong was Su Zimo's flesh? Even a middle-grade flying sword would not be able to hurt his flesh after circulating the mental cultivation technique of flesh petrification. But now the 5 skulls bit through Su Zimo's skin instantly. The skulls sucked continuously and devoured Su Zimo's essence blood. The red glint in their eyes intensified and they looked excited, as though they were alive. "If you want to eat, I'll let you eat your fill." Right then, Su Zimo suddenly hollered and no longer suppressed the demonic chi in his body. Mixed with his surging bloodline, it burst forth. That was the power of blood chi. It was much stronger than the power of blood chi alone. At that moment, demonic chi coiled around Su Zimo's body and his bloodline surged. His body expanded and his eyes shone with endless coldness. It was as though he was possessed by an ancient demon with a murderous aura. Most cultivators could sense the appearance of demonic chi. However, at that moment, Su Zimo was already far away from the battlefield and was almost at the edge of Dongling Valley. At that distance, the cultivators trapped in the battlefield could not sense the demonic chi on Su Zimo's body at all. Furthermore, they did not have the mind and energy to do so. However, the blood-robed young man opposite Su Zimo was shocked and his expression changed. Su Zimo was way too close to him. At that distance, Su Zimo was almost like an undefeatable god. The skulls that were initially devouring Su Zimo's essence blood were suddenly destroyed by a terrifying power of blood chi. The situation changed instantly. Initially, Su Zimo was at a disadvantage and could be taken in as a blood slave at any moment. Now both sides were in a different situation. The blood-robed young man's life was hanging by a thread. Boom! Su Zimo's gaze was sharp as a knife. He hollered and strode forward, causing the ground to shake violently. "Hand over your life." Su Zimo reached out with both arms and grabbed the blood-robed young man who was still retreating with a pale face. He wanted to use the ultimate killing move of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the Great Wilderness, Divine Steed Dismemberment. If he managed to grab hold of the blood-robed young man, he would definitely not be able to escape the fate of being dismembered. In Su Zimo's opinion, as long as he could drag the blood-robed young man down with him before his death, he would have profited greatly. Just as the blood-robed young man was about to be killed by Su Zimo, a figure suddenly appeared behind him. It was the Jindan realm spirit demon Yu Fei. Yu Fei was extremely surprised to see Su Zimo release demonic chi. However, his reaction was fast. Before Su Zimo could do anything, he stood in front of the blood-robed young man and saved the latter from death's door. "Piak! Piak!" Yu Fei scoffed coldly with a hint of mockery in his eyes. He reached out and grabbed Su Zimo's wrists instantly. At the same time, Yu Fei's chest emitted an even stronger aura that suppressed Su Zimo's blood chi. Inner core. That was the inner core. Su Zimo's wrists were gripped by Yu Fei and he felt weak all over as his eyes dimmed. What a pity. He was one step behind. If he had a single more breath, the blood-robed young man would definitely be dead. Once Su Zimo released his power of blood chi, he was confident that he could kill even a 4 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator. "Su Zimo, you are indeed strong." Yu Fei said coldly. "However, with me around today, you won't be able to hurt a single hair on the young master." This time round, the palace lord had specially instructed Yu Fei and Peng Yu to protect the young master. If anything were to happen to the young master, the two of them would definitely die. Chapter 222. Ah! Su Zimo reared his head and howled into the skies. His eyes widened and his black hair danced without wind as his blood chi surged. Boom! 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 Su Zimo's bloodline rumbled as lightning flashed and demonic chi coiled around him. His tendons and bones trembled. He was already pushing his strength to its limits. Even so, Yu Fei, who was standing opposite him, was still expressionless as he gripped Su Zimo's wrists tightly without budging at all. This was a complete suppression in terms of strength and cultivation realm. There was no technique to speak of. The reason why Jindan phenomenons were created was because of the high quality of Jindan and its pure spirit energy. It could resonate with the spirit energy of heaven and earth and create phenomenons from there. Demons did not have spirit energy in their bodies, and naturally did not have Jindan phenomenons. However, the inner core of demons was formed from the essence of their skin, flesh, tendons, marrow, and organs. It was the source of their strength. After forming an inner core, a demon's skin, flesh, bloodline, bones, and organs would transform completely, and their strength would increase exponentially. That strength was enough to crush all Foundation establishment spirit demons. Yu Fei looked at Suzimo, who was still struggling, and raised his chin in a condescending manner. His lips curled and his gaze was cold. Fufufu. The blood-robed youth walked over slowly as well, sneering coldly with a mocking look in his eyes. In his eyes, Suzimo was like a mouse that had fallen into the hands of a cat, struggling endlessly to no avail. I told you, you won't be able to escape today. The blood-robed youth stood before Suzimo as well and said coldly with a bright gaze, "Be my blood slave obediently." Waving the pure white bone staff in his hands, the blood-robed youth chanted an obscure incantation. In the void, a strange power began to fill the air. The blood-robed youth's eyes shone with a dark green glow that was mysterious and sinister. When Suzimo's gaze met with his, he felt a wave of dizziness. Not good. In an instant, Suzimo lost his mind. It was as if he had fallen into a boundless darkness, sinking deeper and deeper, unable to extricate himself. An extremely evil power began to invade Suzimo's mind. Suzimo's eyes glowed with a faint green light. "Ah!" Suzimo roared in his heart. His voice was hoarse, but he was still unable to break free from this mental control. "No one can control me." Suzimo lowered his head, his entire body trembling violently. The veins on his neck were exposed, and the blood vessels on his face were clearly visible. He was in incomparable pain, but he still did not give up. The blood-robed young man's technique was an extremely powerful and strange secret skill called the blood slave technique. Once a cultivator was corroded by the power of the blood slave art and fell into a spiritual illusion, it would be very difficult for them to break free with their own strength. Therefore, the casting of the blood slave spell could not be interrupted or affected by external forces. In the eyes of the blood-robed young man, the current situation was extremely suitable for him to cast the blood slave technique. Suzimo was controlled tightly by Yu Fei and could not move at all. The three of them were far away from the battlefield and nobody could interrupt the entire casting process. The blood-robed young man could almost imagine Suzimo kneeling before him with a respectful and pious expression as a blood slave. However, be it the blood-robed young man or Yu Fei, they had missed out on something. That was the only variable. That variable did not only affect the fates of Suzimo, the blood-robed young man, and Yu Fei. It also affected the Battle of Dongling Valley. Perhaps no one here would have expected that the impact of that variable was not limited to that. From this day forth, the impact would continue and even stir the entire Tianhuang mainland with raging waves. At the edge of Dongling Valley, Suzimo extended his arms and stood on the spot, trembling non-stop with a pained expression. His arms were gripped tightly by two pairs of hands. Opposite him was the Jindan realm spirit demon Yu Fei. Beside Yu Fei was the blood-robed young man. Suzimo's head was lowered and his black hair drooped down. Right then, Suzimo suddenly felt a strange movement in his chest. A small beast was hiding in the slightly open chest area, looking at Suzimo, who was in agony. Its round and black eyes shone like the stars in the sky, deep and mysterious. Initially, Suzimo was still in the mental illusion and his surroundings were pitch black. All of a sudden, an external force barged in and tore open a gap in the darkness. The next moment, Suzimo caught sight of a little beast. This little beast was like a puppy. It blinked a pair of pitch-black eyes that were sparkling and translucent as it tilted its head to look at him. "Night Spirit," Suzimo murmured softly. When he met the little beast's gaze, Suzimo shuddered and broke free from the mental illusion. The Night Spirit's gaze seemed to contain a mysterious power that could dispel the evil power in Suzimo's body. Although he broke free from the illusion, Suzimo was drenched in sweat and almost exhausted. "Hurry and escape." Suzimo's lips trembled and he said with a hoarse voice. Although the Night Spirit had a mysterious background and helped him break free from the mental illusion, the Night Spirit was still too young. It had not even been a month since the Night Spirit was born. What could a 1-month-old baby do? Even a 1-month-old pure-blooded ferocious beast would be pitifully frail with tender flesh and immature bones, let alone a human baby. Of course, although the night spirit was young, it was intelligent and had already gained sentience. Su Zimo knew that the night spirit could understand his words and the situation before it. His fate was sealed. If he were to fall into the hands of a Jin Dan realm spirit demon, he would not be able to escape even if he had wings. However, the night spirit was different. It looked like a weak puppy. Be it the blood-robed youth or Yu Fei, neither of them would take it seriously and it had a high chance of escaping. When it heard Su Zimo's words, the night spirit's expression was calm and it did not move at all. The night spirit was still hiding in Su Zimo's embrace and did not expose itself. It merely listened attentively, as though it was paying attention to the movements outside. Ugh! Almost at the same time as Su Zimo broke free from the mental illusion, a dull grunt sounded from the other side. The blood-robed youth hugged his head with both hands in extreme pain. His dark green eyes were bloodshot and his facial features were contorted, looking terrifying. If the blood slave art was disrupted by an external force, it would not affect the caster much. However, this time round, the blood-robed youth's blood slave art was repelled by another mysterious force. The failure of the technique coupled with the backlash caused the blood-robed youth to feel as though he was struck by lightning. His head hurt so badly that he almost fainted. Yu Fei frowned. His hands were still gripping Su Zimo's arm as he turned to the blood-robed youth and asked in concern, "Young master, what's wrong?" Right then Su Zimo's chest moved. A black shadow darted out and followed Su Zimo's arm to Yu Fei's arm in a couple of steps. Like a phantom, the black shadow was extremely fast and arrived before Yu Fei's chest in the blink of an eye. The black shadow paused for a moment and suddenly raised its palm. 5 extremely sharp claws reached out and shone with a cold glint. It was as though there was a stench of death and blood as it grabbed towards Yu Fei's throat. Chapter 223. At the same time, the blood-robed youth endured the pain in his head and grit his teeth. Watch out! Su Zimo has something else on him. However, it was already too late by the time he said that. The moment night spirit made its move, Yu Fei sensed something as well, and instinctively turned around to look in that direction. The next moment, Yu Fei's pupils constricted and his heart stopped beating. Exclamation point! Blood flashed and Yu Fei's Adam's apple was ripped apart by night spirit with a huge chunk of flesh. Blood spewed out and splattered all over Su Zimo's body. It had to be said that night spirit's timing was perfect. The entire process was as smooth as flowing water. In that short moment, night spirit displayed a sharp sense and precise grasp of timing in battle. However, that was an ability that no one imparted to it. This was completely an instinct. Killing instinct. When he saw that, Su Zimo was stunned. The blood-robed youth's mind went blank and he was stunned as well. That claw was way too ruthless. Even if Yu Fei was a Jin Dan realm spirit demon, he would not be able to survive such a severe injury. Yu Fei's eyes widened and a ball of black light burst forth from his chest with a divine glow. He threw a backhand punch towards night spirit's head. It was a final struggle of a Jin Dan realm spirit demon. Although the entire process seemed long, it happened in a split second. Yu Fei's reaction was extremely fast. Right after his throat was ripped apart by night spirit's claw, the first thing he did was to strike and kill night spirit on the spot. His main artery was severed and his blood chi was severely drained. Yu Fei had already realized that he was definitely going to die. However, he had to kill night spirit before he died. Against Yu Fei's incoming punch, night spirit leaped and tilted its head, dodging to the side with all its might. Bang! Even so, Yu Fei's fist still landed heavily on night spirit's waist. Yeah! Night spirit cried out in pain as a large part of his abdomen caved in. His entire body was like a kite with its string cut. He was sent flying back by the punch and fell back into Su Zimo's arms. Night spirit's eyes were closed as he coughed up blood. He had already fainted. Seeing this scene, Su Zimo felt his heart ache. The night spirit, who was not even a month old, was much weaker than a Jin Dan realm spirit demon. It was like a baby holding a dagger in his hand. Although he had the power to kill an adult, he was far from being a match for the adult. In truth, if Yu Fei hadn't been heavily injured and lost a large amount of blood and qi, his strength would have been greatly reduced. Just now this punch could very well blow up Night Spirit's body. This punch seemed to have exhausted the last of Yu Fei's life force. Young master, hurry leave? Yu Fei's face was pale and his throat was broken. He could not speak clearly and stuttered, but he was still trying his best to speak. The moment he said those 4 words, Yu Fei fell to the ground with a thud. His eyes were lifeless and the blood from his throat stained the ground beneath him. Su Zimo stuffed Night Spirit back into his robes and looked at the blood-robed youth opposite him with a cold, murderous gaze. At that moment, Su Zimo was not in a good state. With the help of Night Spirit, he managed to break free from the mental control of the blood slave art. However, he had expended a huge amount of energy during this period of time, and was physically and mentally exhausted. It was comparable to fighting a top expert. The blood-robed youth was not in a good state either. The interruption of the blood slave art and the backlash caused the blood-robed youth's mind to be in a daze. Both of them were in terrible states and it was unknown who would emerge victorious if they were to fight. However, when he saw Yu Fei's death and heard his dying words, the blood-robed youth already had thoughts of retreating. Moreover, what kind of person was he? He was the young lord of Blood Crow Palace and had an incomparably noble status. Why should he fight to the death with this Foundation establishment cultivator before him? As long as he avoided this person for the time being and waited for perfected Jin Dan to arrive from the battlefield, this lad would definitely die. At that thought, the blood-robed youth made up his mind. Retreat. Right then, Su Zimo's gaze looked over. It was as sharp as a sword, as though it could shred him into pieces. That was not the gaze of a human at all. It was more like a famished ancient ferocious beast. Ferocious, violent and bloodthirsty. The blood-robed youth's heart skipped a beat and he retreated half a step back instinctively. Boom! That half a step caused Su Zimo's aura to increase tremendously. Under the guidance of his aura, Su Zimo executed the plow heaven stride and charged forward. Bursting with the power of blood chi, he threw a punch that transformed into a gigantic seal that descended from the skies. Su Zimo's eyes were cold and he had no intention of holding back. Earlier on, he was nearly controlled by the blood-robed youth and became the latter's blood slave. Night Spirit was severely injured and his fate was unknown. More than half of the most elite disciples of Misty Peak's Foundation establishment realm were dead. 2 elders of the sect were dead as well. All of these blood debts had to be repaid with the life of the blood-robed youth before him. Save me! The blood-robed youth was shocked and shrieked. Reaching into his storage bag, he withdrew a white bone shield. Injecting spirit energy, the white bone shield expanded instantly, and the blood-robed youth tossed it over his head hurriedly. The blood-robed youth's courage was already weak, and he did not dare to attack at all. He could only defend passively. In his opinion, as long as he could last 10 rounds, perfected Jin Dan would definitely arrive from the battlefield not far away to provide reinforcements. They would save him and kill Su Zimo at the same time. On the battlefield of Jin Dan, the 10 perfected Jin Dan cultivators of Blood Crow Palace, led by Peng Yu, surrounded Wen Xian and Elder Yu and attacked. They had complete control of the situation. If not for Wen Xian's Jin Dan phenomenon, the 2 of them would have died a long time ago. However, releasing the Jin Dan phenomenon consumed a lot of spirit energy. Wen Xian could not hold on for long. Peng Yu's expression changed when he heard Wen Xian's cry for help. Hurry and reinforce the young master. Nothing must happen to him. Peng Yu pointed at the 2 perfected Jin Dan cultivators and shouted. The 2 perfected Jin Dan cultivators retreated hurriedly and soared into the air, speeding in the direction of the blood-robed youth. The development of the situation was as the blood-robed youth had expected. Indeed, perfected Jin Dan cultivators arrived after his cry for help. However, the blood-robed youth was wrong about something. Bang! Su Zimo's fist landed on the white bone shield with a deafening sound. The bone shield trembled violently and cracks appeared on it as its light dimmed. The white bone shield was destroyed by a single punch from Su Zimo. Pust! The blood-robed youth's expression changed starkly as he gasped. Immediately after, Su Zimo's figure flashed and arrived before the blood-robed youth. Su Zimo's eyes shone coldly as he reached out and grabbed the blood-robed youth's arms, ripping them apart. At the same time, he bent his knees and charged forward like a divine steed. Divine steed dismemberment. Shing! A blood mist filled the air. Ah! Accompanied by the blood-robed youth's tragic cry, Suzimo ripped his arms off forcefully. After divine steed dismemberment, it was divine steed trample. Suzimo bent his knee and struck the blood-robed youth's chest, making use of the momentum to leap. Stomping twice on the blood-robed youth's head, Suzimo's figure had already passed the blood-robed youth without any sluggishness. The two killing moves were seamless and could be said to be perfect. The moment Suzimo landed, the blood-robed youth collapsed on his back as well. His chest was caved in and his throat was shattered. His face was a bloody mess. He was already dead after being trampled beyond recognition. The blood-robed youth was wrong about one thing. Suzimo didn't even need 10 rounds to kill him but 3. Chapter 224. The moment the blood-robed youth died, an extremely terrifying aura burst forth from Black Crow Mountain that was hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, as though the apocalypse had arrived. Every single living being on Black Crow Mountain was scared out of their wits as they sprawled on the ground motionlessly. Who is it? Who is it? How dare you kill my disciple? In the depths of Black Crow Mountain, a deep and sinister roar sounded from a gigantic palace that was filled with endless killing intent and rage. I'm going to tear you into pieces and grind your bones to dust. Boom! Accompanied by a deafening explosion, the entire palace shook violently as the blood mist in the surroundings turned thicker, almost materializing. The entire palace seemed to be floating in the blood sea, faintly discernible. A figure charged out from the palace and suddenly opened his mouth, sucking in a deep breath. Splash! The blood sea surged, forming a gigantic vortex as seawater surged endlessly into the figure's open mouth. In the blink of an eye, the surrounding blood sea vanished. A middle-aged man stood in midair. His black hair draped over his shoulders and his face was thin, wearing a dark red robe. His eyes were dark green and shone with a sinister glint. Caw! Caw! Suddenly an ear-piercing cry sounded from Black Crow Mountain. Initially, the cry was far away in the horizon. However, in the blink of an eye, it had already arrived. A gigantic pitch-black crow with bloodshot eyes flapped its wings and streaked across the skies above Black Crow Mountain, speeding over. This was the king of the many blood-eyed crows in Black Crow Mountain, the Blood Crow King. When the palace lord first arrived at Black Crow Mountain, this crow was the first one he subdued. The crow had obtained quite a bit of benefits from following the palace lord, and its current cultivation was already equivalent to the peak of nascent soul realm. Master! The Blood Crow King arrived above the palace and suddenly descended. By the time he landed on the ground, he had already transformed into a black-robed cultivator who knelt on the ground with a respectful expression. Come, follow me for a spin. The palace lord's gaze was cold as he said coldly, I want to see who dares to touch my disciple. I want him to pay with his blood. Dongling Valley. The blood-robed youth was dead, lying in a pool of blood. The 3 rounds had only lasted for a few breaths of time. The time was too short. The 2 perfected Jindan cultivators who had come to provide support had yet to arrive. They were too far away to save the blood-robed youth. Seeing this, the 2 Jindan perfected masters were dumbfounded. The 2 of them seemed to have thought of something terrifying. Their faces suddenly became incomparably pale and extremely unsightly. Their bodies faintly trembled. The blood-robed youth was the only true disciple of the Blood Crow Palace Lord. They had escorted the blood-robed youth to Dongling Valley. Now that the blood-robed youth had died tragically here, there was a high chance that Blood Crow Palace's lord would target them first in his rage. Their only chance of survival was the green-robed cultivator not far away. Only by capturing this person alive and escorting him to the Palace Lord of Blood Crow Palace would they have any hope of survival. Whoosh! Whoosh! Their eyes were red, and their faces were full of murderous intent. The spiritual power in their dantian was crazily circulating, and their speed was pushed to the limit as they rushed towards Suzimo. On the other side, Suzimo had expended almost all of his remaining stamina after killing the blood-robed youth in 3 moves and was panting heavily. Be it the connection, strength or timing of those 3 moves, he was already at the limit of what he could unleash. In a head-on clash, he managed to kill a 4 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator in a one-on-one fight. Even if Suzimo was in his peak condition, he might not be able to achieve such results. If not for the fact that he had attained lesser mastery of the organ's refinement section and released a strong power of blood chi, Coupled with the blood-robed youth's weakness, the outcome of this battle would have been hard to predict. After killing the blood-robed youth, Su Zimo turned back to look at the two Jin Dan perfected masters not far away with a mocking look in his eyes. Swoosh! Su Zimo's sleeves trembled and a supreme-grade flying sword shot out. Shing! Using the flying sword, Su Zimo first cut open Yu Fei's chest and retrieved the demon beast inner core within. At the same time he grabbed their storage bags and tossed them into his own. Thereafter his sword sped forward and sliced off the blood-robed youth's head. He's already dead and his head is with me. Come and get it if you want, ha ha. Gripping the blood-robed youth's head in his hands, Su Zimo reared his head and laughed maniacally. His voice was loud and clear, spreading in all directions. Because Su Zimo was standing rather far away, he was already close to the edge of Dongling Valley. Coupled with the fact that he killed the blood-robed youth in 3 moves, it was so fast that apart from the two Jin Dan perfected masters who were rushing over, no one else noticed it. But now Su Zimo's voice reverberated through Dongling Valley, and everyone heard it loud and clear. There was a momentary pause in the fight between the cultivators on both sides. Be it the cultivators of Blood Crow Palace or the Misty Peak disciples, all of them glanced in Su Zimo's direction instinctively. Immediately after, everyone's expressions changed starkly. However, the Misty Peak disciples revealed looks of joy. As for the Blood Crow Palace cultivators, their faces were pale as though they had lost their parents. Capture that man alive. Don't let him escape. Peng Yu roared. There were only 8 perfected masters of Jin Dan of Blood Crow Palace, who were initially surrounding Wen Xian and Elder Yu. Now that they heard Peng Yu's roar, another 2 Jin Dan perfected masters left the battlefield and sprinted in the direction of Su Zimo with a thunderous might. Poof! 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 The pressure on Wen Xian decreased, and he took advantage of the distraction of one of the Jin Dan perfected masters to release the power of phenomenon. Numerous fine raindrops fell on this person's body, instantly piercing countless bloody holes in his body, causing him to be riddled with holes. That person's eyes dimmed as he fell from midair. Peng Yu grit his teeth. Initially, he wanted to capture Su Zimo personally, but now he could only stay where he was. Swallowing a huge mouthful of elixirs, Peng Yu circulated his spirit energy furiously and unleashed a torrential attack. He wanted to kill Wen Xian and Elder Yu as soon as possible. In the skies, the blood-eyed crows that were initially surrounding the remaining 40-odd Misty Peak disciples were now charging towards Su Zimo with bloodshot eyes. More than half of the hundreds of Foundation establishment cultivators of Blood Crow Palace had also moved away. With that, the pressure on everyone from Misty Peak decreased significantly. Suddenly everyone saw a glimmer of hope, a ray of hope. Due to the death of the blood-robed youth, the entire situation changed slightly. The battlefield was in chaos. No matter what, Qin Yu and Ji Chengtian were both legacy disciples of Misty Peak. One was at 5 Meridian Foundation Establishment while the other was at 4 Meridian Foundation Establishment. They were extremely strong. As long as they could make use of this opportunity to kill their way out of Dongling Valley and send a message to the sect, they would have a chance of survival. On the other side, for Jin Dan perfected masters had already charged towards Su Zimo. The blood-eyed crows in the skies charged over together with most of the Foundation establishment cultivators on the ground. Such a vast and mighty army had practically formed a raging wave that was surging over. In the face of that wave, Su Zimo seemed incomparably insignificant and was almost drowned by the dense crowd and blood-eyed crows. It was easy to imagine what would happen to him. Chapter 225. Qin Yu turned to look in Su Zimo's direction with a conflicted gaze and clenched his fists. Bro! Little Fatty could not help but exclaim. Lung Ro could not bear to watch. Everyone from Misty Peak knew that this slim chance of survival was fought for by Su Zimo single-handedly. Right now, there was no longer any perfected being Jin Dan who cared about their lives. Even the number of Foundation establishment cultivators blocking their path had decreased by more than half. Almost everyone's attention was drawn to Su Zimo. Hurry, let's go. Qin Yu grit his teeth and waved his arm, hollering. At this moment, indecisiveness and hesitation would only cause everyone's deaths. Qin Yu and Ji Chengtian worked together and walked at the front, releasing spirit arts continuously. Enhanced by the sect's secret skill, the flying sword shuttled through the battlefield and blood splattered everywhere. Although everyone from Misty Peak was covered in injuries, they endured their pain and pulled themselves together, following closely behind the two of them and killing their way out of Dongling Valley. On the other side, Su Zimo was in a terrible state. Previously, he had expended almost all the spirit energy in his dantian when he released the Fiend Suppression Seal. Thereafter, he was mentally and physically exhausted after resisting the corrosion of blood slave art. Finally, he burst forth with his peak state and killed the blood-robed youth cleanly in 3 rounds, expending the last of his stamina. Right now, Su Zimo was at his weakest. Not far away, the 4 perfected being Jean Dan sped over with murderous auras. Dense swarms of blood-eyed crows and hundreds of Blood Crow Palace Foundation establishment cultivators swarmed over. Dust billowed and killing intent filled the air. Even under such circumstances, Su Zimo's face did not show any signs of panic. His eyes were calm and his expression was calm. He was channeling a secret skill. There was a blood refinement fiend sutra recorded on the lid of the stone coffin in the inheritance ground of the fiend sections. That secret skill originated from the blood refinement fiend sutra and was called blood escape. The blood refinement fiend sutra was all about the usage of bloodlines and described how to activate the power of one's bloodline. The blood escape technique was no exception. Once the blood escape technique was released, a third of the bloodline would be burned in exchange for a burst of speed for a short period of time, allowing the user to escape 1,000 miles away. Of course, the blood escape technique also had very obvious side effects. After 1/3 of their bloodline was burnt, both human beings and demons would become extremely weak. Their limbs would turn cold, and they would find it difficult to breathe. They might even pass out. How long this state of weakness would last depended on one's physique. The stronger one's physique was, the shorter the time it would take to return to normal. But if there were no accidents, it would take at least 10 days to half a month of recuperation to completely recover. Su Zimo had no choice but to turn around and flee. However, the direction behind him was the opposite of Misty Peak. If he really used blood escape, the distance between Su Zimo and Misty Peak would only increase. Su Zimo had no choice but to turn around and flee. Su Zimo circulated the Heart Sutra of the blood escape art. Forming a hand seal, he bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a stream of essence blood. Dong! 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 Suddenly, Su Zimo's heart thumped violently, as though it was about to leap out of his chest. It was deep and powerful, as though someone was beating a heavenly drum. With every beat of his heart, a stream of scarlet blood would flow through his limbs and bones. A faint layer of flames burned on the surface of the blood. It was extremely strange and exuded endless power. Taking a deep breath of air, Su Zimo turned around and released Divine Steed Fleeting, sprinting out of Dongling Valley. Swash! Su Zimo turned into a streak of bloodlight and disappeared from everyone's sights in the blink of an eye. It was too fast. Everyone was stunned for a moment and their eyes were dazed. After a few breaths, the 4 perfected Jean Dan were the first to react. They burst forth with full speed and chased in the direction Su Zimo had disappeared in. A secret skill as such must exhaust the potential of a living being in exchange for a temporary burst of power. That lad won't be able to last long. Let's chase after him. That's right. That lad will definitely become extremely weak once he stops using a secret skill as such. The few perfected Jean Dan in midair had sharp eyes and saw through the nature of blood escape before long. One of the Jean Dan perfected beings hollered, "Blood Crow Army, find traces of that man. Don't alarm him after you find him. Just follow him and wait for our reinforcements." Caw, caw. An ear-piercing cry sounded from the blood-eyed crows that filled the skies, as though they were responding. Soon after, the many blood-eyed crows entered the void, disappearing without a trace. Although the blood-eyed crows were only Foundation establishment spirit demons, their speed in midair was not inferior to that of perfected Jean Dan. Su Zimo sprinted with all his might. Although he did not turn back to look, Su Zimo could guess that this group of cultivators of unknown origins would definitely not give up and would be following him closely. The blood in his body was still burning. Su Zimo had to escape from everyone's pursuit after a third of his blood was burned. Blood escape could increase one's speed by a few times in a short period of time. However, the increase was not limitless. It was based on the cultivator's foundation. After all, Su Zimo was only a Foundation establishment cultivator. In other words, Su Zimo might not be able to surpass perfected Jin Dan in terms of speed after using blood escape. Perfected Jin Dan's cultivation realm was a level higher than his. Before long, Su Zimo arrived at a dense forest. After sprinting for a while, Su Zimo suddenly stopped in his tracks. In a flash, he pounced towards a leopard that could not dodge in time. That leopard could only be considered as a wild beast that had just gained sentience. Although there was some spirituality in its eyes, it did not know how to cultivate yet. Su Zimo coiled the blood-robed youth's head around the leopard's tail and threatened, "Run as far as you can. Don't take it off in the middle." Sensing the killing intent in Su Zimo's eyes, the leopard was so scared that its heart skipped a beat, and it nodded hurriedly. Su Zimo released his grip and the leopard left the place in fear. When it was far enough away, it fled as fast as it could. Su Zimo turned back and sneered. He had to do something to distract his pursuers. Su Zimo believed that the leopard would be enough to distract his pursuers and cause them to be confused, so that they would not be able to determine his escape route. Su Zimo took a deep breath and continued sprinting forward. After an unknown amount of time, the power of the blood escape technique had been exhausted. This meant that a third of Su Zimo's blood had been burned. The moment Su Zimo came to a stop, he felt the world spin and he almost fell to the ground. Su Zimo adjusted his breathing and clenched his fists, trying his best to keep his mind clear as he staggered forward. He could not fall asleep just like that. He was not truly out of danger yet. He had to find a relatively secluded place and set up some simple formation so that Su Zimo could hide without worry. Before long, Su Zimo found a cave at the foot of a mountain not far away. Su Zimo walked around inside and heaved a sigh of relief when he did not discover any other demon beasts. Given his current state, he would have to fight a tough battle even if he encountered a spirit beast. Chapter 226. Su Zimo fell to the ground, feeling as though his tendons and bones were about to break. Enduring the pain, he carefully retrieved Night Spirit from his robes and hugged it to his chest. He was worried about Night Spirit. Even though Yufei's throat was crushed and he lost a large amount of blood chi, he was a Jin Dan realm spirit demon after all. His final counterattack was extremely terrifying. Even if Su Zimo was in Night Spirit's shoes, he could not guarantee that he would survive. However, when Su Zimo took out Night Spirit, he was stunned. In Dongling Valley, Su Zimo witnessed with his own eyes that Night Spirit was struck in the waist by Yufei. Its body was contorted and it coughed out blood. It was clear that its organs were severely injured and its fate was unknown. But now, Night Spirit's body had returned to normal. Night Spirit curled up in front of Su Zimo's chest. It was no longer bleeding from its mouth and its breathing was slow and steady. Sensing Su Zimo's gaze, Night Spirit suddenly raised its head and blinked its beady eyes. They were pitch black and resembled gemstones as it looked at Su Zimo spiritually. The man and beast looked at each other. Haha. When he saw that Night Spirit was fine, Su Zimo was delighted and could not help but laugh. Yeah. As though it could sense the joy in Su Zimo's heart, Night Spirit opened its mouth slightly and called out in response. Su Zimo carried Night Spirit and checked it carefully. To his surprise, Su Zimo discovered that Night Spirit's self-healing abilities were extremely strong. Although it had yet to recover, the wounds in its organs were already healing and its broken bones were reconnecting. Ever since it escaped from Dongling Valley, Night Spirit had not consumed any elixirs and was relying solely on its own body to recover and adjust. It had been less than a month since Night Spirit was born, of course. The greater the potential of Night Spirit, the harsher the conditions for growth. If they were dire beast cubs, their parents would also be powerful pure-blooded dire beasts. They would be able to prepare sufficient food and resources for their cubs. And now, Su Zimo was only a foundation establishment middle-stage cultivator. There wasn't much he could provide for the Night Spirit. Su Zimo took out Yufei's inner core from his storage bag and placed it under the Night Spirit's nose, wanting to feed it. Just now, if it weren't for the Night Spirit's attack, he would have been reduced to a blood slave of the blood-robed young man. Therefore, Su Zimo did not hesitate or feel any heartache when he fed the Night Spirit the monster core. Night Spirit's nose twitched and he sneezed. He turned his head away and pursed his lips. His eyes were filled with disdain. Seeing this scene, Su Zimo was a little speechless. That monster core could be considered as his most precious item from head to toe. To think that the other party wouldn't even fancy it. You must be crazy to not want to eat something so good. After escaping death and seeing that night spirit had survived, Su Zimo was in a great mood. He could not help but curse jokingly and put away the demon beast's inner core, preparing to consume it later on. I'll put you down first. I'll go out and set up some formations. Let's hide here for a couple of days. Su Zimo said to Night Spirit. Unexpectedly, Night Spirit arched its body and tried to burrow into Su Zimo's embrace, as though that was the most comfortable place. Su Zimo could not tolerate it and stuffed it back into his embrace. He went to the entrance of the cave and started setting up formations. After burning a third of his blood, Su Zimo was extremely weak. However, he did not dare to rest. He had to seize every second to set up a few formations so that Su Zimo could be at ease. After drawing a few formation patterns, Su Zimo suddenly stopped and a strange feeling surfaced in his mind. It was as though he was being targeted. There was no danger and there were no warning signs. However, Su Zimo felt that something was amiss. It was as though there was a pair of eyes watching him from a hidden corner. Su Zimo continued drawing formation patterns without batting an eyelid. However, most of his attention and gaze were patrolling the surroundings constantly, trying to find the source of that ominous feeling. After a while, Su Zimo found nothing. Am I hallucinating? Su Zimo's gaze flickered as he frowned in deep thought. It would be fine if it was a hallucination. However, if it wasn't. Right then, Su Zimo's chest moved and Night Spirit popped its head out. Ia! Night Spirit called out. Su Zimo was deep in thought and did not pay attention to Night Spirit's cries. Ia! Ia! After a while, when Su Zimo ignored it, Night Spirit called out again and stomped gently on Su Zimo's chest with its meaty paws. However, it did not extend its sharp claws. What's wrong? Su Zimo snapped out of his trance and lowered his head to ask. Night Spirit raised its head and looked in the direction of the skies with a cold gaze. In its pitch-black eyes, an imperceptible dot was vaguely reflected. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he raised his head. Above the firmaments, there was a black dot hidden in the clouds that was faintly discernible. At this distance, ordinary Foundation establishment cultivators would not be able to see what was circling in the skies with their eyesight. However, Su Zimo's eyesight was extremely strong, and he could already tell that the black dot was a blood-eyed crow. Not only that, there were even more black dots gathering in this direction within the clouds. With the blood-eyed crow as a guide, perfected Jean Dan would find this place before long. Suddenly, Su Zimo felt a chill run down his spine. He did not manage to shake off his pursuers at all. If he had not sensed that something was amiss and Night Spirit had not discovered the source, he might have been surrounded and killed here without even knowing how he died. Run! Su Zimo's first reaction was to continue running. However, the world was huge. Where could he run to? There were way too many blood-eyed crows. Coupled with their fast speed and sharp sense of smell, Su Zimo would not be able to avoid the fate of being caught no matter where he fled to. The blood-eyed crows were the other party's eyes and were everywhere. This meant that Su Zimo was constantly under the other party's surveillance. There was nowhere to run. Furthermore, Su Zimo was in an extremely bad state right now. He had yet to recover from the blood he burned earlier on and was already exhausted. What should he do? Su Zimo closed his eyes and tried his best to compose himself as he tried to think of a way to break out of this situation. He believed that there had to be a way to avoid the blood-eyed crow's surveillance. A moment later, Su Zimo opened his eyes. He already had an idea. Su Zimo withdrew the demon beast inner core from his storage bag and swallowed it. Su Zimo was prepared to release blood escape once more. Using blood escape twice in a row meant that 2/3 of his blood would be burned and there was a high chance that he would die. However, Su Zimo had no other choice. He could only consume the demon beast inner core in advance in case of any accidents. Su Zimo was already at his weakest. If he did not release blood escape, he would not be able to escape far and would definitely be caught by perfected Jean Dan. Su Zimo withdrew the map from his storage bag and studied it carefully. Before long, Su Zimo put away the map and channeled blood escape. Transforming into a streak of blood light, he changed his direction slightly and sprinted. Chapter 227. This time round, Su Zimo was no longer fleeing aimlessly. There was only one place to avoid the blood-eyed crow's surveillance: Jishui River. After all, the blood-eyed crows were only Foundation establishment spirit demons, and had yet to form their inner cores. They could not convert their external breathing into internal breathing, and naturally could not enter Jishui River. However, Su Zimo was different. He cultivated both immortality and demonic. Although he did not have an inner core, he could use spirit energy to form a light barrier around his body to isolate the river water. The map showed that Jishui River ran through the entire territory of the Great Zhou dynasty. No one knew where Jishui River flowed to or where its source was, and it was not shown on the map either. However, that was not important. What Su Zimo had to do was to enter Jishui River and follow the flow. That way, he would be able to avoid the blood-eyed crow's tracking. He sprinted the entire way, chasing after the stars and moon. By the next morning, he finally arrived at the banks of Jishui River. The moment he arrived, Su Zimo's face was pale and his consciousness was fading. If not for the fact that Su Zimo had consumed the demon beast's inner core beforehand and executed blood escape twice in a row, he would have been a dead man by now. No matter how strong his physique was, he would not be able to withstand burning 2/3 of his essence blood. This time round, his body was almost completely drained. Su Zimo staggered and lost his balance. Unable to control his body, he fell forward and fell into the river. Gurgle, gurgle. A series of bubbles appeared on the surface of the river. Su Zimo was stirred by the river water and shook his head. Struggling to stand up, he regained some of his consciousness. Night Spirit burrowed out of Su Zimo's embrace and floated in the river for a while. By the looks of it, Night Spirit was rather good in the water as well. Gritting his teeth, Su Zimo hugged Night Spirit and forcefully conjured a spirit energy barrier. With a leap, he disappeared into Jishui River. The river water was cold. For someone who had burned more than half of his bloodline, that coldness had already turned into a bone-chilling chill. Su Zimo's body was trembling. His eyes were wide open as he held on to Night Spirit and continued to dive. Su Zimo forcefully raised his spirit and did not dare to be careless. He held the supreme grade flying sword in his left hand and constantly patrolled the surroundings. The Jishui River was not a good place. The degree of danger here was definitely not any less than that of the Great Desolate Jungle. There were also many powerful demonic beasts living in the Jishui River. If he was the slightest bit careless, he could very well be buried here. Su Zimo did not dare to dive too deep. Normally, the deeper the river, the stronger the demonic beasts that appeared. Right now, Su Zimo was surrounded by mostly chi condensation spiritual beasts that had just begun to cultivate. There were so many different types of aquatic demons that it was a dazzling sight. These spirit beasts only glanced at him from afar. None of them dared to approach him. Suddenly, these spirit beasts seemed to have been frightened by something as they scattered and fled at an extremely fast speed. At the same time, Su Zimo was alarmed. Diagonally, the river water surged and a huge water column came against the current. It was murderous and mighty. A spirit demon. A Foundation establishment spirit demon had appeared. Clang! 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 Su Zimo endured the piercing pain in his dantian and injected spirit energy forcefully. The sword trembled continuously. Su Zimo activated the supreme grade flying sword right away, wanting to have a bloody battle with the spirit demon. However, his heart skipped a beat and he put away the flying sword. Whoosh! The spirit beast separated from the water and Su Zimo saw it clearly this time round. Green armored crocodile. The green armored crocodile was one of the more common demon beasts in the Jishui River. It was named the green armored crocodile because of the horn that was wrapped around its body that was indestructible like armor. The green armored crocodile was extremely fast in the water and arrived before Su Zimo in almost the blink of an eye. At that moment, Su Zimo felt as though he was not facing an aquatic demon beast, but a mountain. Swoosh! When the green armored crocodile arrived before Su Zimo, it opened its gigantic mouth without hesitation and swallowed Su Zimo with ease along with the river water. Standing in the mouth of the green armored crocodile, Su Zimo looked incomparably tiny but extremely calm. Seeing that the jaws of the green armored crocodile were about to close, Su Zimo took out his supreme grade flying sword once more and activated the 4 spirit patterns on it. He said coldly, "You'd better not move." At that moment, Night Spirit extended its claws and landed gently on the green-armored crocodile's tongue. It did not use much strength, but the green-armored crocodile's tongue was already bleeding. "Now listen to me." Standing in the mouth of the green-armored crocodile, Su Zimo said slowly, "Right now, follow the Jishui River and head downstream. I'll borrow your stomach for the time being. I'll naturally leave once my injuries are healed. Furthermore, I promise you that I won't harm your life." The green-armored crocodile had already cultivated to the level of a spirit demon, and had long gained sentience. Su Zimo believed that the green-armored crocodile would definitely be able to understand his words. Indeed, after a slight hesitation, the green-armored crocodile nodded. That was a good choice. Could either trust Su Zimo, or it could die right now. Hugging Night Spirit, Su Zimo slid down the green-armored crocodile's throat all the way to its stomach. At the same time, Su Zimo crushed the defensive talisman that Lung Ro gave him. A barrier of light surrounded Su Zimo. Although there was a slight stench in the stomach of the green-armored crocodile, it was a perfect hiding place where no one would disturb him, and he could calm down and recuperate. If Su Zimo was the one carrying Night Spirit through the Jishui River, Su Zimo would not have time to recuperate at all. This arrangement could be considered as killing two birds with one stone. Su Zimo intended to stay in the stomach of the green-armored crocodile for the time being. He would leave this place and return to the shore after his and Night Spirit's injuries were healed. The green-armored crocodile wagged its tail and swam down the river, vanishing from the spot. 3 days later, a large number of blood-eyed crows circled the skies above the Jishui River, covering the skies in a dense pack. Peng Yu and the other cultivators who participated in the Battle of Dongling Valley stood on the shore, looking at the gushing river in silence with terrible expressions. Before they set off, there were 10 perfected Jin Dan, but now there were only 6 left. Peng Yu's face was yellow and he seemed to be seriously injured. He had rushed here before he could recuperate. The number of Foundation Establishment cultivators was also reduced by half. Before long, an ear-piercing cry sounded from the distant horizon. The blood-eyed crows paused for a moment before splitting into 2 sides in the skies, as though they were welcoming some powerful existence. Not long after, a huge pitch-black blood crow king galloped over. On its back was a middle-aged man in blood-colored robes. His hands were behind his back, his face was thin and his gaze was dark. "Greetings, Palace Lord." Everyone from Blood Crow Palace knelt on the ground hurriedly and lowered their heads. Trembling, they did not dare to meet the Palace Lord's gaze. Gritting his teeth, Peng Yu mustered his courage and said, "Palace Lord, Peng Yu recounted everything that happened in Dongling Valley in detail. However, in reality no one saw how Yufei died. That was also the greatest mystery of the entire incident. If Yufei did not die, the Blood Crow Young Lord would not have died with the protection of the Jin Dan Realm Spirit Demon." Chapter 228. You mean to say that the combined forces of 4 Meridian Foundation Establishment cultivators and Jin Dan Realm Spirit Demons died in the hands of a mid-stage Foundation Establishment cultivator? The Palace Lord looked at Peng Yu with ghastly green eyes. Although his tone was calm, there was an inexplicable coldness to it. There were so many people and it was supposed to be a massacre without any suspense. None of the people from Dongling Valley should have escaped. But what happened in the end, Peng Yu and the others lowered their heads in the face of the Palace Lord's questioning. None of them dared to reply. The air seemed to have frozen, adding a murderous aura to it. Blood Crow Palace's Palace Lord exuded an extremely terrifying aura that could not be resisted. At that moment, all the cultivators who were kneeling before the Palace Lord felt extremely insignificant, as though they were facing a god of the universe. I can understand if perfected Jin Dan was the one who tried his best to escape. However, how did a mere Foundation Establishment cultivator manage to escape from the encirclement of so many people, I just want to know how a Foundation Establishment cultivator managed to escape. The Palace Lord's voice turned sharp and sharp. Many cultivators revealed pained expressions but none of them dared to make a sound. What trash! The Palace Lord's expression was cold and his glabella shone with a sinister glint. His eyes were filled with killing intent as he slowly extended his palm and pressed down in the direction of Peng Yu and the others. Suddenly, as though it was under immense pressure, the raging river came to a strange standstill. Poof! There was a crisp sound. Right in front of everyone. Peng Yu's body exploded into a blood mist, and he died on the spot without a corpse left. When they saw that, everyone kneeling behind Peng Yu was completely stunned. They felt as though their hearts were gripped by someone and they even forgot to breathe. Peng Yu, who had cultivated the Jindan phenomenon, did not even have a chance to explain himself before he was killed just like that. The Blood Crow Palace's lord's gaze swept across everyone. Whichever person his gaze landed on, their faces would turn paler, as though they could smell death. I'll give you a chance to make up for your mistakes. Find Su Zimo for me. If he's alive, I want to see him. If he's dead, I want to see his corpse. The moment the Blood Crow Palace's lord said that, everyone felt their hearts lighten as though they were relieved of a heavy burden, as though they had just taken a trip through the gates of hell. Soon the crowd dispersed. Some dived into the Jishui River, while others followed the riverbank to search for clues. Jijie! The Blood Crow King suddenly raised his head and screeched twice. The numerous blood-eyed crows circling in the sky seemed to have received some sort of order, and they all scattered. The Blood Crow King walked forward and said in a deep voice, "Master, I got them to search along the Jishui River. It's just that Jishui River is really too long. I really don't know where this Su Zimo will come ashore." "Don't worry, I have my ways," the Blood Crow Palace Lord said with an indifferent expression. The Blood Crow King seemed to have thought of something as his eyes lit up. He nodded and said, "That's right." The young lord had used the Blood Slave spell on this person. Although the young lord was dead, the power of the spell must still remain in this person's body. As long as you use your secret skill to search, you'll definitely be able to locate this lad. Yes, there's something about this Jishui River that can isolate my secret skill from searching. A vicious glint flashed through the Blood Crow Palace Lord's eyes as he said coldly, "However, as long as this lad leaves Jishui River, I'll definitely know." At that moment, Su Zimo did not know that he had accidentally dodged a huge calamity by sneaking into Jishui River in order to avoid the blood-eyed crow's pursuit. After entering the green-armored crocodile's stomach, Su Zimo's consciousness was already close to blurry. The damage to his body from releasing blood escape twice in a row was way too great. Su Zimo tried his best to maintain his consciousness and opened the blood-robed youth's storage bag. Without even looking, he poured out everything inside. Su Zimo found a few bottles of healing elixirs and swallowed them. Keeping the rest of the items, he began to recuperate. Prior to this, Su Zimo had consumed a demon beast's inner core, and a massive amount of essence energy was sealed within his body. With the help of the demon beast's inner core and elixirs, Su Zimo began to cultivate before long. Huff! Huff! Growling! Tiger leopard thunder sounded. Essence energy regenerated endlessly in his organs and his bones crackled. Blood was constantly regenerated like a trickle, causing Su Zimo's body to regain its vitality. Time passed by rapidly. After a long time, Su Zimo's body finally recovered and his injuries were completely healed. Splash! Splash! Boom! Boom! The bloodline in Su Zimo's body surged like a tidal wave. Within the surging bloodline, endless lightning flashed and mixed with a deep rumble of thunder, causing one's heart to shudder. The stomach of the green-armored crocodile was filled with extremely rich demonic chi that was almost corporeal. All of that demonic chi was produced after Su Zimo's cultivation. The green-armored crocodile was shocked to discover that its physique had improved under the tempering of the demonic chi as well. To think that this is a demon beast that has formed a core. I've misjudged. The green-armored crocodile took Su Zimo as a demon beast that had cultivated an inner core, and was merely in human form right now. After an unknown period of time, Su Zimo's eyes opened like a meteor streaking through the night, shining brightly with the divine light. Su Zimo's clothes fluttered and a tiny head popped out, blinking its bright pitch-black eyes that were filled with spirituality. The man and beast exchanged glances and Su Zimo smiled. Surviving a calamity was always a joyous thing. After refining the demon beast's inner core, Su Zimo made some progress in the organs refinement section as well. Although there was still a long way to go before he reached greater mastery of the organs refinement section, it was already rather difficult. I wonder if little Fatty, Lung Ro and the others managed to escape. I wonder how Peak Master Wenxian and Elder you are doing right now. At the thought of everyone from Misty Peak, Su Zimo sighed internally. As of now, he did not know the background of the faction that attacked them in Dongling Valley. However, it was clear that the other party came prepared. On the one hand, the other party was seeking revenge in the Battle of Dongling Valley. After all, Su Zimo was the one who killed all the cultivators of that faction outside Linfeng City. However, the greatest possibility was that the other party was doing it for the sect competition. The sect competition would determine the spirit, elixir, talisman and weapon ranking lists. Only those who were ranked in each of the top 10 would be qualified to enter the ancient battlefield. Although the ancient battlefield was extremely dangerous, it was way too important for every Foundation establishment cultivator. Danger meant opportunity. In every sect competition, Ethereal Peak occupied the most spots on the spirit ranking, and would definitely occupy 3 of them. Now that the 3 legacy disciples of Misty Peak were gathered, what would it mean if the blood-robed youth took all 3 of them in as blood slaves under his control? It would mean that the blood-robed youth would be able to take up at least 3 spots in the sect competition. Given the blood-robed youth's strength as a 4 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator, he could even take up 1 spot. That was 4 spots. If the blood-robed youth enslaved a few more powerful Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators, there was a high chance that all the spots on the spirit ranking would belong to him. In reality, that was the intention of the Blood Crow Palace's lord as well. It was all for the sake of ensuring the safety of the Blood Crow young master as much as possible in the ancient battlefield. However, it was a pity that everything was for naught. The Blood Crow young master did not die in the ancient battlefield but outside. Chapter 229. After recovering from his injuries, Su Zimo did not linger in the stomach of the green-armored crocodile for too long. Ascending the riverbank, Su Zimo rode on his sword and patrolled the surroundings before taking out a map to compare. As he had expected, he was getting further and further away from Misty Peak. Given his current location, it would take him a month to return to Misty Peak even if he sped without rest. Right then Su Zimo frowned. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his mind without any warning. Right after, Su Zimo's vision blurred, as though he saw the blood-robed youth who was already dead standing before him with a strange expression and a sinister smile. A strange green color appeared in Su Zimo's eyes and paused for a moment before disappearing. Su Zimo narrowed his eyes with a terrible expression. Although the blood-robed youth was already dead, there was still the remnant power of the blood slave art in his body. Furthermore, he did not notice it when he was recovering from his injuries earlier on. The cultivators of that mysterious faction knew some extremely strange methods that were unpredictable and impossible to guard against. Just now, was this strange pain a coincidence, or was someone manipulating it from behind the scenes? Su Zimo's gaze flickered and he fell into deep thought. He was more inclined to believe that someone was behind this. After all, he had never felt such a sharp pain when he was in the stomach of the green-armored crocodile. However, it appeared not long after he left Jishui River. That was too much of a coincidence. Furthermore, if someone was manipulating it from behind the scenes, what was that person's motive? Are they trying to determine whether I'm dead or alive? Or are they trying to track me down? After pondering for a moment, Su Zimo let out a long breath and murmured, "They're truly persistent." If his guess was correct, it meant that he might be able to avoid the other party's detection in Jishui River. However, Su Zimo could not stay in Jishui River forever. He had to think of a way to deal with it. If he wanted to take drastic measures, there were only 2 ways. The first was to think of a way to get rid of the remnant power in his body. The second was to think of a way to get rid of his pursuers. Neither of those 2 paths was realistic and Su Zimo could not do it with his own strength. Su Zimo had no clue about the first path. Su Zimo had a vague idea about the second path. Of course, the second path was way too dangerous and there was a high chance that he would die. Su Zimo opened the map again and searched for his next destination. There were some dangerous places marked on the map. Some of them were labeled with danger, some were vague. Among them, there was a small blood-red fork drawn on one of the spots. The color was extremely heavy. That proved that was the most place. Su Zimo knew very little about this place and only knew that it was a ruin. A ruin from the primordial era. The primordial era was too far away from the present, so there weren't many things left behind. However, there must be something special about the fact that the primordial ruin could be preserved to this day. A vicious glint flashed through Su Zimo's eyes as he put away the map and sped in the direction of the primordial ruin. Let's see what dangers there are in the primordial ruin and if they can kill you guys. Su Zimo intended to lure his pursuers to the primordial ruin. At that moment it was almost evening. Su Zimo did not rest and sprinted. He did not know who the cultivators chasing after him were, or what their cultivation realms were. However, the earlier he arrived at the primordial ruin, the higher his chances of killing everyone behind him. Morning. Su Zimo was travel-worn and finally arrived at the periphery of the primordial ruin. When he arrived, Su Zimo was shocked to discover that there were many cultivators around. There were Qi condensation and foundation establishment cultivators and even some Jindan perfected ones standing in the air. At a single glance, there were tens of thousands of cultivators gathered here. It was a shocking sight. There were even a few cultivators among them. There was a high chance that they were Jining Jinjuan. At the nascent soul realm, one could no longer tell their cultivation realms with the spirit-peering art. Su Zimo merely felt that the auras of those people were terrifying and were even stronger than perfected Jindan perfected ones. Something's not right, Su Zimo was confused. Initially, he thought that those people were specially waiting for him here because they were recruited by the mysterious faction. If that was the case, the methods of the mysterious faction were truly unpredictable. However, after observing for a while, Su Zimo discovered that those people were clearly not from the same sect. Instead, they came from all over the world. Su Zimo was even more confused. Although he had yet to truly step foot into the primordial ruin, what was the point of gathering so many cultivators here? Of course, in order to hide his identity, Su Zimo had already placed his sex identity badge into his storage bag. Fellow Taoist, what are all of you gathered here for? Su Zimo asked a random itinerant cultivator at the Qi condensation realm. When the itinerant cultivator saw that Su Zimo was a foundation establishment cultivator, he revealed a respectful expression. That person cupped his fists. Fellow Taoist, you don't know. A month ago, in the primordial ruin ahead, there was a golden beam of light that shot into the skies. It lasted for a long time and even attracted lightning and thunder. Before Su Zimo could say anything, another itinerant cultivator who was passing by could not help but interject. I heard that it was a rainbow glow and was extremely extraordinary. I heard that there were even dragon roars and phoenix cries. TSK, I even saw a true dragon. Although it was just a scale and a claw, it was shocking enough. Each of its scales is bigger than our bodies, and its claws are longer and sharper than our flying swords. More cultivators from the side came over and commented as though they were telling the truth. Spittle flew everywhere and their eyes shone brightly. It was clear that they were bragging and were getting more and more mysterious. Su Zimo did not really understand and asked again, So, this proves that there are definitely treasures in the primordial ruin ahead. Furthermore, the treasure has just been born. There's also another possibility. The restrictions of a cave abode of a powerful existence in the primordial ruin have disappeared and there are too many treasures within, causing a change in the world. Yes, it might be a legacy left behind by a sect from the primordial era that's waiting for me to inherit. The surrounding cultivators chimed in with their own guesses. But I heard that the primordial ruin is a place of great danger? Su Zimo added. Yes. Someone nodded. That's a rumor. However, very few people know what dangers lie within. Since ancient times, cultivators have died here almost every year. Of course it's dangerous. However, it's a primordial ruin after all, and there are many things left behind from the primordial era. If you manage to pick up a treasure, you might be able to soar. At that point, many cultivators' eyes shone with excitement. If something left behind from the primordial era was still intact, it would definitely be a treasure. Chapter 230. For the past month, cultivators rushed over endlessly from outside the primordial ruin upon hearing the news. On one hand, it was because there seemed to be an ancient treasure within the ruin. On the other hand, the primordial ruin was way too attractive for many cultivators. The ancient battlefield was a secret ground left behind from the ancient era and formed its own dimension. Even the ancient battlefield attracted many cultivators, let alone a mysterious place left behind from the primordial era. Many cultivators managed to encounter heaven-defying opportunities in the ancient battlefield and soared into the skies. What would happen if one managed to obtain an opportunity in the primordial ruin? If a cultivator were to obtain it, they might be able to dominate the world. If a sect were to obtain it, they might become the strongest sect in the Great Zhou dynasty. In fact, they might even become the strongest sect in the entire north region of Tianhuang mainland, and might even be on par with the immortal sects. Among the tens of thousands of cultivators, most of them were itinerant cultivators and some were from sections. Among them, Heaven Azura sect and Purple Cloud sect were the strongest. In the Great Zhou dynasty, those two sects were second only to the 5 major sects, and Su Zimo had heard of them as well. The few Jining Xinjuan were from those 2 sects. Roar! Suddenly a roar sounded from not far away. A golden lion with a terrifying aura sped over. It was massive and had a frightening aura. Its eyes were widened with a cold glint. It was clear that the golden lion was a spirit demon that had cultivated an inner core, and was extraordinarily handsome. Many cultivators were startled and quickly scattered. The golden lion stepped through the air and arrived beside a Jining Xinjuan, lowering its head and body obediently. Yes, the Jining Xinjuan nodded and leaped onto it. Ta! 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 The sound of hurried hooves could be heard. A pure white horse with a single horn on its head galloped over from the distant skies. It snorted continuously and arrived beside another Jining Xinjuan at an extremely fast speed. Before long, the beasts of the few Jining Xinjuan present had arrived. Those beasts had terrifying auras and were all spirit demons that had cultivated an inner core. However, when these exotic beasts looked at the ancient ruins in the distance, their eyes faintly revealed a hint of fear. Let's go, let's go. Among them, a Jining Xinjuan of Heaven Azura sect ordered, and led his disciples towards the primordial ruin. Immediately after, Jining Xinjuan of Purple Cloud sect led his disciples and followed. The primordial ruin is so dangerous. Should we observe it? If we stay here and watch, I'm worried that someone will beat us to it if there really is an ancient treasure. Let's follow them then. This is our last chance. If we follow the group of nascent souls, we'll have a chance to survive even if we can't obtain the ancient treasure. The remaining cultivators discussed among themselves and quickly divided into 2 camps. Most of the cultivators chose to follow the Tianluo sect and Purple Cloud sect to the ancient ruins. Only a small portion of the cultivators with hesitant expressions on the spot. Initially, Su Zimo did not intend to enter so early. However, he had just realized that traces of blood-eyed crows had already appeared in the skies. Furthermore, their numbers were increasing gradually. This meant that the blood-eyed crows that were closest to this place had already caught up. It wouldn't be long before the people who were chasing after him arrived here. I can't delay any longer. A vicious glint flashed through Su Zimo's eyes. If he was blocked outside the primordial ruin, he would have nowhere to run. Su Zimo blended into the crowd and headed towards the primordial ruin. There was a dense forest outside the primordial ruin and it was dark within. The closer they got to the primordial ruin, the denser the trees around them were, emitting an ancient aura. Every single ancient tree was extremely thick, and needed more than 10 people to wrap their arms around it. They rose from the ground and towered into the clouds. A cool breeze blew gently, and the fragmented sunlight shone through the dense and lush leaves, bringing some warmth to everyone. Although the group of cultivators was huge with tens of thousands of them and looked rather imposing, they seemed insignificant in this primordial forest. Unknowingly, Night Spirit had popped out. Sprawled on Su Zimo's chest, it stuck its head out and surveyed the area with a pair of pitch-black eyes with a cold expression. Even the beasts that Jining Xinjuan sat on, such as the golden lion and unicorn that had cultivated inner cores, were trembling in fear in this primordial forest. However, there was no trace of fear on Night Spirit's face. All of a sudden, a tragic cry sounded from the front. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he stopped in his tracks and looked over. Not far ahead, a gigantic anaconda was coiled on the branches of an ancient tree, and its body was almost fused with the tree. If not for the fact that there were a few people in its mouth and blood was spewing out, Su Zimo would not have been able to detect it with his eyesight. The anaconda was way too huge. More than half of its body was hidden in the leaves. However, just the part that was exposed was more than 100 feet long. Those few cultivators were not even enough to fill the gaps between its teeth. The most terrifying thing was that even perfected being Jean Dan could not resist at all, and was crushed in a single bite before being devoured. Boom! A nascent soul cultivator attacked brazenly. His sleeves trembled and an extremely terrifying power burst forth, smashing heavily onto the anaconda's body. The anaconda's body slanted from the impact and a few of its scales slid off, revealing its flesh. However, not only did the anaconda not retreat, it was even more ferocious as its eyes shone with a cold and cruel glint. Pust! The anaconda opened its mouth and inhaled fiercely, as though it wanted to devour the entire world. A violent wind howled. The gigantic air current was almost corporeal, like a saber or sword. It surged over and even the branches on the ancient tree were severed by the evil wind as leaves rustled down. There was no way the weaker cultivators could control their bodies, and were sucked into the anaconda's mouth instantly. This was the true anaconda eclipse. Even though Suzimo had cultivated this move as well, he was still extremely shocked when he saw it now. Beast, you must have a death wish. Another nascent soul cultivator attacked and hollered, shooting out 3 flying swords. The 3 flying swords were surging with an extremely powerful force that far exceeded the scope of a spirit art. When the 3 flying swords were about to enter the anaconda's mouth, the nascent soul cultivator who attacked seemed to have sensed something and his expression changed starkly. Not good, hurry and retreat. That person exclaimed and waved his sleeves, sweeping up the 3 flying swords that were shot out and fleeing into the distance immediately. Suzimo's eyelids twitched. There were 2 fist-sized bumps on the anaconda's head that were protruding, resembling a pair of horns. That's not an anaconda. It's a WR. If it was an anaconda, it could only be considered as a remnant demon beast. However, if it cultivated into a WRM, it would be equivalent to a pure-blooded ferocious beast. The few nascent soul cultivators in the group sped into the distance immediately. The army of cultivators behind them did not dare to linger and followed hurriedly. The crowd was in a mess and fled with all their might. Bang! The tail of the WRM suddenly fell and smashed into the crowd, causing a blood mist to appear in the air. It was way too tragic. Hundreds of cultivators died in the blink of an eye. Be it chi condensation, foundation establishment or perfected Jean Dan, they were like ants against the WRM and could not withstand a single blow. At that moment, everyone had yet to step foot into the primordial ruin. This meant that the massacre had only just begun. Chapter 231. The primordial forest before him was 100 times more dangerous than Songlang Mountain Range. Any random demon beast that popped out was a pure-blooded ferocious beast. Even Jining Zhenjuan was scared away, and did not dare to take it head-on. Suzimo took advantage of the chaos to escape. Lowering his body, he used his limbs to slither through the dense forest like an anaconda with agile movement techniques. In such an environment, Suzimo's chances of survival were much higher than cultivators of the same level. That was because, to a certain extent, Suzimo was a demon. He knew the habits and methods of most demon beasts and the rules of survival in the forest. Initially, Suzimo was worried that Night Spirit would run around. Although Night Spirit could kill a Jean Dan realm spirit demon in Dongling Valley, Night Spirit was still a demon beast. However, Suzimo knew very well that Night Spirit's strength was far inferior to a Jean Dan realm spirit demon. To Suzimo's surprise, although Night Spirit was not afraid, it was extremely obedient and stayed in his embrace obediently. It merely stuck its head out and surveyed the surroundings vigilantly. Before long, Suzimo finally escaped from the WRM's attack range. Before he could catch his breath, Suzimo's expression changed. He suddenly sensed an even greater danger approaching rapidly. Not good. I've got to leave this place as soon as possible. His survival experience in Songlang Mountain Range told him that the blood stench of the battle behind him would attract even stronger demon beasts. The strength of those demon beasts would not be weaker than the WRM, and they should be pure-blooded ferocious beasts as well. If he was trapped here by those pure-blooded ferocious beasts, he would definitely die. At that moment, Suzimo finally understood that Heaven Azura sect and Purple Cloud sect did not have the motive of chasing away those itinerant cultivators. The main objective of the two sects was to make use of the flesh of those itinerant cultivators to attract the ferocious beasts in the forest so that they could take the opportunity to escape. When those itinerant cultivators made use of the two major sects, they were actually being made use of by the two major sects as well. Due to the flood dragon blocking the way, the tens of thousands of cultivators were quickly divided into two camps. Among them, most of the cultivators were intercepted by the ferocious flood dragon, while a few nascent soul cultivators of the Tianluo sect and the Purple Cloud sect led their disciples towards the ancient ruins. Behind the cultivators from the two sects, there were also some rogue cultivators, including Su Zimo. Most of the cultivators who could break through the flood dragon's blockade had some tricks up their sleeves. Su Zimo glanced at it. Among these rogue cultivators, there was indeed a cultivator that Su Zimo had some impression of. This person was dressed in a gray Taoist robe and held a folding fan in his hand. He looked to be in his 30s, with a pale face and a slightly plump figure. His appearance was ordinary, but his eyes were extremely spirited. When they were outside, Su Zimo had a few words with this person. This person liked to talk nonsense and even said it as if it was true. Previously, the rumor about dragons roaring and tigers roaring in the ancient ruins, and seeing a true dragon whose scales were bigger than a human's, came from this person. Who would believe these meaningless words? Su Zimo had checked the cultivation of this person and found that he was only at early-stage foundation establishment. You've got some skills, Su Zimo nodded to himself. To be fair, the reason why Su Zimo could keep up was because of his demonic cultivation methods. However, it was truly not easy for this gray-robed cultivator to be able to make it this far with the strength of an early-stage foundation establishment. As though he sensed something, the gray-robed cultivator turned back and glanced at Su Zimo, smiling with a friendly attitude. Right then a commotion broke out ahead once more. A gigantic tiger darted out of the forest. It was dozens of feet tall and had a ferocious expression, lunging towards the crowd immediately. What was even more frightening was that the tiger had 9 tails. 9 tails, tiger form? Su Zimo recalled for a moment and said slowly with a grim expression, "Pure-blooded ferocious beast, Lu Wu." At the same time, the gray-robed young man frowned and murmured, "It's a Lu Wu." The Lu Wu was one of the ancient ferocious beasts. It had 9 tails and was shaped like a tiger with terrifying strength. The moment the Lu Wu charged into the crowd, the golden lion roared, wanting to push it back or even kill it. However, the Lu Wu danced with its 9 tails and lunged forward. In a single round, it bit off the golden lion's neck and fresh blood gushed out. A blood mist spread through the forest. The owner of the golden lion, a Jining Jinjuan, fled into the distance without hesitation. Many cultivators had already lost their order and were panicking as they fled in all directions. However, the forest was not as simple as they thought. Furthermore, this was a primordial forest. It was easy to enter but difficult to get out. Swoosh! A centipede that was more than 10 meters long and as thick as a water bucket crawled out of the forest. Its entire body was blood red and its 1,000 legs moved continuously with a menacing gaze. The blood-colored centipede killed its way into the crowd and split the formation into 2 once more. Powerful demon beasts appeared continuously in the forest and most of them were pure-blooded ferocious beasts. There was no way Su Zimo could fight against them and could only make use of the chaos to escape. In a forest as such, even Jining Zhenjuan was useless. They had to escape the moment they saw pure-blooded ferocious beasts. Su Zimo could not imagine what sort of terrifying existences he would encounter if he truly entered the primordial ruin. It was way too tragic. There were more than 30,000 cultivators who entered the primordial forest. Now there were only a few thousand left and the rest were almost buried in the forest. If they could truly make it out of the forest, how many of the remaining few thousand would survive? 100 kilometers away from the primordial ruin, a gigantic pitch-black crow flapped its wings and sped over at lightning speed. A middle-aged man in blood robes sat on the back of the pitch-black crow. They were the Blood Crow King and Blood Crow Palace's lord. The Blood Crow Palace's lord had just executed a tracking secret skill when he gradually frowned and his gaze flickered. "Master, what's wrong? Could Su Zimo have hidden in Jishui River again?" The Blood Crow King asked. No, the Blood Crow Palace's lord's expression darkened and he grit his teeth. That lad is about to enter that region. Ah! The Blood Crow King did not understand and was stunned for a moment. A moment later, he was enlightened and a look of fear flashed through his eyes as he asked tentatively, "That region?" "Yes," the Blood Crow Palace's lord nodded. The Blood Crow King analyzed, "That lad's goal should be to lure you there. You must not fall for it, master." Pausing for a moment, he continued, "Furthermore, what sort of place is that? Even Jining Jinjuan, a void reversion, might not be able to escape unscathed. If a mere foundation establishment cultivator like him goes, he'll definitely die." "That lad is scheming," the Blood Crow Palace's lord said with a dark expression. "This is an open scheme. Even if I know his intentions, I have to go. Even if he dies, I have to witness it with my own eyes." "Master, be careful. Don't be rash, it's fine. This open scheme can be said to be rather brilliant. It's a pity that the lad missed something." The Blood Crow Palace's lord waved it off and sneered. "He doesn't know my identity, nor does he know what's in that region. Even if those existences are alerted, given my identity, it shouldn't be an issue for me to escape unscathed. Let's go. I want to see where else this Su Zimo can escape to." Chapter 232. The primordial forest was filled with a pungent stench of blood. A blood mist floated and hung on the branches and leaves, condensing into blood droplets that slid down silently. Amidst the brambles, on the gravel and between the branches, broken corpses were strewn one after another. Their deaths were tragic. They were either torn into two or crushed into meat paste, completely unrecognizable. This forest had already turned into a Shura purgatory. It was filled with blood and brutality as the roars of ferocious beasts echoed one after another. The ancient trees swayed and the ground quaked. Su Zimo believed that someone would have already regretted it the moment the massacre started. However, it was already too late for them to leave this primordial forest by then. The ferocious beasts in this forest had already cut off their escape route completely. There were fewer and fewer people left. Su Zimo witnessed with his own eyes that the nascent soul cultivator at the front was dragged away by a seemingly harmless flower. There was a tragic cry before silence. Even the most ordinary vegetation in the forest was left behind from the primordial era, and was extremely terrifying. The pressure increased. Even nascent souls could not guarantee that they could escape this forest. Even if Su Zimo was familiar with the laws of the jungle, it would be difficult for him to leave this place alive. Right then, Su Zimo glanced over and discovered that the gray-robed cultivator not far away had suddenly changed directions. He was no longer following behind Heaven Azura sect and Purple Cloud sect, burrowing into another patch of bushes. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he pondered. Right now, even though Heaven Azura sect and Purple Cloud sect had nascent souls paving the way and were strong, they were huge targets and were the #1 targets of the primordial beasts. If they took another path at this moment, it would be relatively safer. Of course, that was only relative. In this primordial forest, every step was filled with killing intent. Danger could be seen everywhere. There was no safe place. Su Zimo's gaze flickered and he changed directions as well, following the gray-robed cultivator's path. Like an anaconda, Su Zimo slithered through the bushes and caught up to the gray-robed cultivator before long, trailing far behind. The gray-robed cultivator's speed was not fast and he would even stop occasionally. Additionally, the gray-robed cultivator's actions were rather strange. His right hand was holding the folding fan while his left hand was spread open. His thumb was constantly touching his other fingers at an extremely fast speed, as though he was trying to do something. What confused Su Zimo the most was that even though more than half of the tens of thousands of cultivators had died in the woods, there was no sign of fear on the man's face. Such a temperament was too terrifying. Right then, the gray-robed cultivator stopped in his tracks and hid once more. Seeing this scene, Su Zimo did not act rashly. His entire body was pressed against the ground as he held his breath and concentrated. A moment later, Su Zimo was alarmed. Immediately after, a large shadow swept over their heads, covering the sky and the sun, exuding a terrifying and ferocious aura. It flew towards the direction of the Tianluo sect and the Ziyun sect at an extremely fast speed. Su Zimo's face paled, and he broke out in a cold sweat. Even though Su Zimo could sense danger in this primordial forest with his spiritual perception, He was still able to sense danger ahead of time. However, it would be too late by then. The gray-robed cultivator stood up and continued sprinting forward. This person has some tricks up his sleeves. If we follow behind him, we might really be able to get out of this forest. Su Zimo followed closely behind. Indeed, Su Zimo followed behind the man and stopped along the way, avoiding the attacks of ferocious beasts multiple times. In Su Zimo's eyes, the gray-robed cultivator instantly became unfathomable. Before long, the gray-robed cultivator ahead seemed to have sensed something and suddenly turned around. Su Zimo crouched down hurriedly and hid. The gray-robed cultivator swept his gaze and paused for a moment at the spot where Su Zimo was hiding. Smiling meaningfully, he turned around and continued forward. This time round, the gray-robed cultivator took left and right steps in a strange manner. Burrowing into the forest, he disappeared from Su Zimo's sight. Su Zimo followed hurriedly but realized that he had completely lost track of the gray-robed cultivator. Su Zimo realized that his tracks had been exposed and the gray-robed cultivator had sensed it. That was why the gray-robed cultivator chose to shake him off. Foo-foo. Su Zimo smiled faintly and checked on the spot carefully before choosing a direction to chase in. Traversing through such a forest would definitely leave behind traces. Others might not be able to see it. However, given Su Zimo's experience in surviving in the forest, he could find clues and determine the direction the gray-robed cultivator left in. Of course, that would mean that Su Zimo's speed would be much slower. A moment later, Su Zimo looked over and could not help but heave a sigh of relief. Not far ahead was the edge of the primordial forest. All of a sudden, Su Zimo's expression changed starkly. Without hesitation, he shifted horizontally from the spot. Clang! A deafening sound came from behind. Turning back, Su Zimo could not help but gasp and feel chills run down his spine. A gigantic ferocious beast with 8 legs and burning with flame stood in front of Su Zimo with a menacing expression. It was an ancient ferocious beast, the blue flame spider. Although the blue flame spider did not know how to spit silk, its 8 sharp claws were more terrifying than any divine weapon. Just now, the blue flame spider's claws descended like a gigantic guillotine filled with spikes, carving out a ravine on the ground. If Su Zimo was half a step slower, he would have been sliced into 2. Given Su Zimo's cultivation realm, he would be burned to ashes the moment he came into contact with the flames on the blue flame spider's body. Su Zimo did not dare to linger and turned to flee. Clang! 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 The blue flame spider chased after him relentlessly at an extremely fast speed and sparks flew as its claws sliced through the rocks. Rumble! Boom! Suddenly, a deafening sound came from behind Su Zimo. Not far behind him, a gigantic pitch-black cave appeared beneath the blue flame spider. It was dark and deep within, emitting a chilling killing intent. A hint of panic flashed through the eyes of the blue flame spider, as though it wanted to escape. Boom! Suddenly, a huge pitch-black fleshy tentacle emerged from the crypt. It was like a giant python and it coiled around the body of the pale flame spider. Screech! Screech! The blue flame spider let out a series of ear-piercing cries and struggled continuously. However, it was to no avail and it was dragged into the cave in the blink of an eye, vanishing. Su Zimo gulped. He did not manage to see what was in the cave at all. Swoosh! Swoosh! A commotion sounded from the forest not far away. The footsteps of ferocious beasts could be heard with killing intent. Suddenly, Su Zimo released his power of blood chi and demonic chi filled his body. He executed divine steed fleeting and sprinted forward with all his might. The silver-winged cicada, bloodthirsty centipede, wind-riding eagle, and many other pure-blooded ancient ferocious beasts charged over with murderous intent. Su Zimo grit his teeth and persevered with a resolute gaze. 50 feet, 30 feet, 10 feet. Swoosh! His vision cleared up. Su Zimo had finally charged out of the primordial forest. As for the many ancient ferocious beasts that chased to the edge of the forest came to a tacit understanding and stopped in their tracks. Their eyes were filled with fear as they retreated slowly. Chapter 233. There were tens of thousands of cultivators that entered the forest behind him. However, Su Zimo believed that less than 1% of them would be able to make it out of the forest alive. As one of them, Su Zimo should be happy. However, Looking at the many ferocious beasts that were retreating into the forest, Suzimo suddenly realized that the moment he charged out of the forest, it also meant that he had stepped onto the land left behind from the primordial era. The primordial ruin. It was marked as the location of the most fearsome place on the map. The primordial ruin that even so many ferocious pure-blooded ferocious beasts were wary of. What sort of ancient secrets were hidden in this region? Suzimo turned around slowly and looked over. That single glance caused Suzimo's pupils to constrict and his heart to stop beating. There were endless piles of bones. At a glance, there was no end to them and they covered the entire land. Many of the skeletons belonged to humans, but there were also remnants of ferocious beasts. Almost none of them were intact and they were all shattered and scattered on the ground. This was a true sea of bones. Standing in front of this sea of bones, Suzimo seemed incomparably tiny. It was as though he would be devoured by the sea of bones the moment he entered and nothing would be left. There was an inexplicable fear, an indescribable suffocation, an omnipresent oppression and a faint stench of blood. Right then, Suzimo's chest moved and Night Spirit suddenly burrowed out, leaping down. Looking at the sea of bones before him, Night Spirit's nose twitched. His expression was grim and his eyes shone with a mysterious glint. All of a sudden, at the edge of the primordial forest not far away, two figures were the first to run out. They were covered in blood and looked wretched. It's them. Suzimo swept his gaze and recognized the two of them. They were Jining Zhenjuan from Heaven Azura sect and Purple Cloud sect respectively. The two of them looked at the forest behind them with lingering fear. When they turned back to look at the sea of bones before them, they were stunned on the spot and could not conceal the shock in their eyes. Even Jining Zhenjuan would feel incomparably tiny in the face of this sea of bones. How tragic of a battle was it for such a terrifying ruin to be formed? Run! It's right in front. Quick, quick! Save me! A cry of surprise came from the forest not far away. Not long after, another group of cultivators rushed out of the forest. There were more than 100 of them. Their hair was disheveled and their clothes were ragged. They fell to the ground and panted heavily. Among these people were Taoist Master Jin Dan and Foundation Establishment cultivators. Including Jining Zhenjuan and Reverend Jin Dan, there were only a little more than 100 cultivators left in the army of tens of thousands of cultivators. The others did not even have the chance to see the primordial ruins. All of them died in the forest. Suzimo glanced in that direction and retracted his gaze. He didn't want to attract the attention of those cultivators. Suddenly, the Night Spirit whimpered. She opened her mouth and gently bit Suzimo's clothes, pulling them towards the sea of bones. You want to go in? Suzimo frowned and asked in a low voice. The Night Spirit nodded. This sea of bones is not simple. I don't know what dangers lie ahead. Let's wait for those people to scout first. We're not in a hurry, Suzimo said. The Night Spirit shook her head. Suddenly, she raised a hind leg and peed on Suzimo. Naturally, Suzimo could dodge it easily. However, on second thought, the Night Spirit had already gained sentience and was extremely intelligent. There must be a reason why she chose to do that. What sect are you from? What's your name? Right then, two Jining Zhenjuan strode over and looked down at Suzimo. Their tone was cold and unquestionable. I'm Suzimo. I don't belong to any sect. Suzimo replied calmly with a half-truth. That's great. Go take a look at the sea of bones. If you can return alive, you can choose from Heaven Azura sect or Purple Cloud sect. We'll let you join either of them. One of the Jining Zhenjuan said. That's right. The other Jining Zhenjuan nodded as well. Suzimo, this is a great opportunity for you. Suzimo sneered internally and did not reply. No matter what, he had to leave this sea of bones. The difference was whether he should leave now or wait for his pursuers to catch up. Given the current situation, if he didn't enter the sea of bones, the two Jining Zhenjuan beside him would most likely kill him right here. Furthermore, the Night Spirit was still persevering. She looked at Suzimo expectantly, eager to enter the sea of bones. At that thought, Suzimo did not hesitate and strode towards the sea of bones. Night Spirit followed beside Suzimo's feet like a half-grown black puppy, with a hint of excitement in the depths of her eyes. The moment Suzimo stepped into the sea of bones, he felt something amiss. The spirit energy in his dantian seemed to be restrained by an invisible force and could not be mobilized. It was similar to the effect of the spirit lock formation, but it was much more terrifying. Su Zimo took a deep breath and walked towards the depths of the Sea of Bones. The Sea of White Bones was eerie and terrifying, yet unusually peaceful. After half an incense's time, Su Zimo had already walked far into the Sea of Bones. However, nothing happened. "Master, let's go in as well. Don't let that lad get ahead of us if there's really something good," someone from Heaven Azura sect suggested. Yes, the two Jining Jinjuan agreed at the same time. With a single order, they led their remaining disciples into the Sea of Bones. With their spirit energy restrained, even perfected being Jin Dan could not walk on air, and could only walk on foot. Jining Jinjuan was the only one who had the ability to fly at low altitudes in the Sea of Bones. The cultivators of both sects had already made up their minds to follow Su Zimo. They wouldn't get too close, but they wouldn't get too far either. If anything were to happen, Su Zimo would die first and they would have a chance to escape. However, not long after the cultivators of both sects entered the Sea of Bones, a huge commotion occurred within. Su Zimo turned around. Waves surged through the Sea of Bones in a ferocious manner. As though they were stimulated by something, the endless white bones bounced up from the ground one after another. Under the support of some mysterious power, they took on all sorts of forms. Some of them formed gigantic white bone palms that reached out from the Sea of Bones and grabbed the crowd viciously. More than half of the cultivators of both sects died. Blood mist spewed out. Some of them transformed into ferocious beasts made of pure bones with immense strength. They were incomparably violent and killed anyone they saw. Around Su Zimo, white bones bounced up continuously as well. However, the white bones seemed to have ignored Su Zimo and the night spirit and surged towards the cultivators of both sects not far away. Could it be that the P of the night spirit is really working? Although Su Zimo did not want to believe it, that was the only possibility. Bang! One of the Jining Zhenjuan clashed head-on with a white bone beast. Jining Zhenjuan's expression changed starkly as he retreated 3 steps back. Immediately after, Jining Zhenjuan's body exploded into a pile of meat paste without a corpse left. Jining Zhenjuan could not even take a single hit from those bone beasts. When he saw that, Su Zimo knew that it was over for Heaven Azura sect and Purple Cloud sect. This Sea of Bones was their final resting place. Chapter 234. The winds and clouds changed and the bone waves surged. As though they were agitated, countless white bones surged and formed all sorts of remnant ferocious beasts. One after another, terrifying existences crawled out from the Sea of Bones. Malevolent auras filled the air and blood chi surged into the skies. Su Zimo could not identify the origins of those remnant ferocious beasts through their skeletal forms. However, there was no lack of human-shaped skeletons among them, and their combat strength was extremely terrifying as well. The remaining 100-odd cultivators of Heaven Azura sect and Purple Cloud sect, including Jining Jinjuan and perfected Jin Dan, were all killed by countless white-bone ferocious beasts. Fresh blood splattered and severed limbs were strewn everywhere as tragic cries rang out endlessly. When he saw that, Su Zimo felt his scalp tingle and his limbs turn cold. Was this the power of the primordial ruin? If these powerful living beings possessed such terrifying combat strength even after death, what cultivation realms were they in when they were alive? Who was it that buried them here, forming such a vast and boundless sea of bones? What was in the depths of this sea of bones? Instantly, countless questions flashed through Su Zimo's mind. At this moment, Su Zimo truly felt how insignificant he was. Even though he was already a Foundation establishment cultivator and could fly on his sword, he was still insignificant. Su Zimo walked step by step towards the depths of the Sea of Bones. It was as though he was walking towards an extremely foreign era. He was walking into an unknown civilization that had been buried in the river of time. The tragic cries behind him were gradually fading. The cultivators of the two sects were all buried in the Sea of Bones without a single survivor. One after another, the ferocious and powerful white-bone ferocious beasts fell to the ground one after another. The Sea of Bones regained its calmness. It was terrifyingly silent. It was as though the killing and massacre just now was merely Su Zimo's imagination. A gentle breeze blew and Su Zimo felt a chill down his spine. Unknowingly, he was already drenched in cold sweat. Su Zimo glanced at Night Spirit beside his feet. He vaguely guessed that the reason why the powerful existences in the Bone Sea didn't attack him was because of the Night Spirit. Night Spirit, on the other hand, was very alert. He sniffed the air while leading the way. Su Zimo followed behind him. In this boundless sea of bones, there was only one man and one beast. There were no signs of life in the surroundings. It was incomparably desolate. A thick fog gradually appeared in front of them. It was getting thicker and thicker, and the visibility was extremely low. Within the fog there was some moisture and a fishy smell. After an unknown period of time, a grayish-white stone pillar stood tall in the fog ahead. It was extremely thick and towered into the clouds. Su Zimo stood in front of this stone pillar, appearing extremely small. Su Zimo reached out and touched the stone pillar. This was out of Su Zimo's expectation. This gigantic stone pillar was left behind from the primordial era. After being battered by wind and rain and the passage of time, its surface was still as smooth as jade without any hint of roughness. Under normal circumstances, even supreme-grade spirit weapons would have lost their spirituality after tens of thousands of years, let alone stone pillars. Furthermore, the primordial era was probably millions or even tens of millions of years away from the present. This stone pillar is a treasure. If only I could carry it away. Su Zimo circled the stone pillar a few times and lamented internally. Of course, that was just a random thought. Given Su Zimo's strength, there was no way he could stuff this stone pillar into his storage bag. Even if Su Zimo had the ability, there was no way he could do that. Given how terrifying the Bone Sea was, who knew what the purpose of such a gigantic stone pillar was? What if he alarmed the terrifying existences in the Bone Sea by moving this stone pillar? Su Zimo circled the stone pillar once more and found no traces on it. Strange. A look of confusion flashed through Su Zimo's eyes. Initially, he thought that there might be some information, patterns or even traces of the primordial era carved on the stone pillar. However, there was nothing on the surface of the stone pillar. A gust of wind blew through the Bone Sea and the fog dissipated slightly. Su Zimo looked around and his gaze froze as he exclaimed softly, 1,000 feet away from this stone pillar, there was another stone pillar standing right next to it. Su Zimo walked over to take a look. This stone pillar was almost the same as the first one he saw. The surface of the stone pillar was as smooth as jade, and there were no traces left behind. As they continued to walk in this direction, a thick and solid stone pillar like this would appear almost every 1,000 feet. What's going on? Su Zimo pondered for a moment but could not figure it out. Under the urging of the Night Spirit, he continued walking forward. Before long, Su Zimo stopped in his tracks once more. He had arrived at the end of the Bone Sea. At the end of the Bone Sea was a towering mountain peak that pierced through the clouds. It was lush and full of life with lush vegetation. There were even green waters at the foot of the mountain, making it look like an immortal realm. For a moment, Su Zimo could not react to the sudden arrival of a vibrant mountain peak from the dead silent Bone Sea. Suddenly, Su Zimo thought of a possibility. The Bone Sea behind him was truly just the edge of the primordial ruin. However, this mountain peak before him might be the center of the primordial ruin. Or perhaps this mountain peak was not even the center of the ruin, and he would only be able to truly come into contact with the secrets of the ruin after crossing the mountain peak? Be it the primordial forest or the Bone Sea behind him, they were merely the defensive lines that protected the center of the ruin. Yeah. The Night Spirit called out a few times and urged Su Zimo to continue walking forward. When he arrived at the foot of the mountain, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as though he sensed something. Glancing sideways, Su Zimo looked towards the forest at the side. Not far away, a figure suddenly appeared beside an ancient tree. He wore gray robes and was slightly plump, holding a folding fan in his hands and had a fair face without a beard. It's you. It's you? The two of them exchanged glances and were stunned for a moment before exclaiming. Su Zimo had not expected to meet this gray-robed cultivator here. Back in the primordial forest, Su Zimo had already discovered that this gray-robed cultivator was not simple and had some tricks up his sleeves. However, after entering the Bone Sea, Su Zimo thought that this person had already died in the Bone Sea. To think that this person would have arrived at this mountain peak first. While Su Zimo was surprised, the gray-robed cultivator was even more shocked. Given his eyesight, he could naturally tell that Su Zimo was only a Foundation establishment cultivator, and there was no way he could have concealed his cultivation realm. The gray-robed cultivator had long known that these tens of thousands of cultivators who wanted to enter the primordial ruin would all die. Apart from him, no one else would survive. To think that this seemingly ordinary green-robed cultivator would be able to cross the Bone Sea. He could understand why the green-robed cultivator could cross the primordial forest. After all, the green-robed cultivator was smart enough to choose to follow behind him in the forest. However, he had already shaken that person off at the end. Interesting. The gray-robed cultivator walked towards Su Zimo slowly with a malicious smile on his face. Chapter 235. Su Zimo narrowed his gaze warily. Although the gray-robed cultivator before him was only at early-stage Foundation establishment, Su Zimo did not dare to be careless. This person exuded a strange aura from head to toe and was unfathomable. Furthermore, the fact that this person could pass through the primordial forest and sea of bones with ease was enough for Su Zimo to be wary of him. The gray-robed cultivator arrived about 10 meters away from Su Zimo and stopped in his tracks. Raising his brows slightly, he asked with a fake smile, "Fellow Taoist, you sure are following me closely. I can't shake you off even with that?" Su Zimo looked at the person calmly in silence. A mocking look flashed through the gray-robed cultivator's eyes as his expression darkened. Suddenly, he retracted his smile and asked coldly, "Tell me, where are you from and why are you following me?" With that said, the gray-robed cultivator glared at Su Zimo's face, trying to find a loophole in Su Zimo's expression and gaze. "I'm not following you." Su Zimo was expressionless as he shook his head. That was the truth to begin with. The gray-robed cultivator could not help but frown when he failed to find anything. Could it really be a coincidence? No. The gray-robed cultivator thought about it. Even if it's a coincidence, I can't let him continue forward. If my plans are ruined because of him, I'll lose more than I gain. How did you pass through the sea of bones? Suddenly, the gray-robed cultivator asked. I walked over. When he heard that answer, the gray-robed cultivator's mouth twitched as he hesitated to speak. The gray-robed cultivator's gaze swept across Su Zimo before landing on Night Spirit, who was beside his feet. When he saw Night Spirit, the gray-robed cultivator could no longer hold it in and rolled his eyes. The gray-robed cultivator mocked, "Fellow Taoist, your preferences are truly extraordinary. Everyone else would look for the cubs of ancient remnant beasts or pure-blooded ferocious beasts as their battle beasts. Yet you're rearing a black dog cub. None of your business." Su Zimo sneered and retorted. The gray-robed cultivator was not angry as he waved the folding fan in his hands and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, let me give you a piece of advice. Since you can pass through the sea of bones, I advise you to turn back and stop advancing. This is not a place you can come to." The gray-robed cultivator pointed to the mountain peak beside him and said word by word with a stern expression. Su Zimo did not reply. He wanted to turn back as well. To be precise, right from the beginning, Su Zimo had no intention of taking the initiative to step into this place. Su Zimo's choice because he was cornered to his back too. If he turned back now, he would to-twos. Furthermore, it was all thanks to Night Spirit's guidance and perseverance that he was able to reach this point. There was no way he was going to retreat that easily. You? The gray-robed cultivator frowned and murmured, "That's troublesome. I can't possibly allow you to follow me and ruin my plans. You go your way and I'll go mine. We won't interfere with each other." Su Zimo was wary of the gray-robed cultivator and did not want to get into a conflict with him. The gray-robed cultivator remained silent for a moment before shaking his head. "No, that's too risky. Since you're not retreating, don't blame me." When he heard that, Su Zimo's expression changed and he attacked without hesitation. The two of them were extremely close. If nothing went wrong, Su Zimo was 70% confident that he could suppress the gray-robed cultivator. Boom! A clear footprint appeared on the ground with the plow heaven stride and the surrounding mud flew everywhere. Almost instantly, Su Zimo arrived before the gray-robed cultivator. Channeling his bloodline, the sound of a tsunami could be heard from within his body, accompanied by lightning and thunder in a terrifying manner. Against Suzumo's preemptive attack and hearing the sounds coming from Suzumo's body, the gray-robed cultivator did not panic at all. Instead, he exclaimed softly with a hint of curiosity in his eyes. Such a powerful bloodline? How did you cultivate? Without saying anything, Suzumo swung his arm and punched in reverse towards the gray-robed cultivator's head. It was like a gigantic seal that crashed down. Not bad, not bad. Against Suzumo's move, the gray-robed cultivator did not dodge or avoid it. Instead, he nodded and praised. Suddenly, the gray-robed cultivator reached out with his folding fan and tapped Suzumo's wrist gently. The speed of this attack was extremely fast. Although it was launched later, it arrived first. The landing point was precise and the timing was impeccable. Bang! Suzumo's wrist went numb and the power of the punch dissipated. Right after, Suzumo's wrist felt a piercing pain as though it was broken. The gray-robed cultivator chuckled and took out a rope from nowhere. He tossed it gently in Suzumo's direction and muttered, "Bind." The rope quickly coiled around Suzumo's body, binding his arms and legs to the sides of his body, coiling round after round. In the blink of an eye, Suzumo was bound tightly by that inconspicuous rope and could not move at all. A black shadow darted out. "Night Spirit, don't move." Suzumo called out to Night Spirit hurriedly. Actually, the moment the gray-robed cultivator attacked, Suzumo had already realized that this person was definitely not at early-stage foundation establishment. He could be perfected Jindan or Jining Jinjuan. At the very least, the gray-robed cultivator's cultivation realm was far above his. Against such a strong cultivator, Night Spirit would not be able to do anything even if he charged forward. In fact, he might even be killed by the gray-robed cultivator in a single move. Night Spirit stopped in his tracks and glared at the gray-robed cultivator coldly. He stuck his head out and growled from the depths of his throat with a chilling, killing intent. Heh! Arriving before Night Spirit, the gray-robed cultivator squatted down and said with a smile, "Black puppy, you've got some guts, huh? How dare you be fierce to me?" The man and beast were extremely close to each other. Night Spirit could reach him with a single raise of his hand. However, after a moment, Night Spirit did not attack and his gaze was still cold. Smiling, the gray-robed cultivator extended his folding fan and tapped Night Spirit on the head. "Not bad, you're quite smart. Consider yourself lucky." Suzumo heaved a sigh of relief. Naturally, he could tell that just now, the gray-robed cultivator was luring Night Spirit to attack on purpose. If Night Spirit had truly attacked, not only would he not be able to injure the gray-robed cultivator, the latter would even take the opportunity to kill Night Spirit. Standing up, the gray-robed cultivator looked at Suzumo with a helpless expression and shrugged. "Since you're unwilling to leave, I can only trap you here. Also, this is the demon suppressing rope. Oh, I don't think you've heard of it before." The gray-robed cultivator continued. "The demon suppressing rope can even bind pure-blooded ferocious beasts tightly. Although your physique is strong, it's not a match for pure-blooded ferocious beasts. Don't try to break free or you'll just be asking for trouble." Suzumo did not reply. Turning around, the gray-robed cultivator took a few steps, seemingly worried as he said, "Stay here obediently. I'll come down in a while to help you release the demon suppressing rope." With that said, the gray-robed cultivator darted into the forest and disappeared towards the peak of the mountain. Chapter 236. Two figures stumbled out of the primordial forest and descended before the sea of bones. "Thank you for saving me, master," the Blood Crow King said with lingering fear. If not for the palace lord, he would not have been able to pass through the primordial forest with his own strength. The palace lord nodded and turned back to look at the remnant ferocious beasts that were retreating in the forest, heaving a sigh of relief. Even with his strength as a void reversion, he had to be careful in passing through the primordial forest. If he were to encounter the overlord of the forest, he could only retreat to protect himself. "Master, are we still going to chase? That lad is only a foundation establishment cultivator. Can he really pass through the primordial forest?" The Blood Crow King's tone was clearly doubtful. Surveying his surroundings, the palace lord noticed the traces left behind by the Heaven Azura sect and Purple Cloud sect cultivators and nodded. "Yes, that lad's luck is not bad. He should have escaped from the crowd. Narrowing his eyes, the palace lord looked at the sea of bones before him in silence. In the depths of the Blood Crow King's eyes there was a deep shock. There were so many white bones piled up into a sea. Furthermore, these were bones left behind from the primordial era that had yet to rot. How strong was the owner of these bones back then? "Master, are we going to pass through the sea of bones?" The Blood Crow King asked carefully at the side. Since there were no traces of Su Zimo here, logically speaking, Su Zimo should have stepped into the sea of bones. However, for some reason, the Blood Crow King felt his heart skip a beat against the sea of bones. Shaking his head, the palace lord said, "I'll use a secret skill to check on that lad's location." "Blood Curse Guide." The palace lord hollered softly as a dark light shone from his eyes. The dark light spread out like smoke and ink, forming a green rune in midair that emitted a strange energy fluctuation. The palace lord exclaimed softly as the rune gradually dissipated. The Blood Crow King asked, "Master, what's wrong?" Frowning, the palace lord shook his head. "This doesn't make sense. That lad should have already passed through the sea of bones. How could a Foundation establishment cultivator like him pass through this place? Could there be a background to that lad's identity?" The palace lord's eyes flickered as he fell into deep thought. "Wait here, I'll go take a look myself," the palace lord of the Blood Crow Palace said to the Blood Crow King. Then, he came to the edge of the sea of bones and chanted a mysterious incantation. Immediately after, the palace lord bit his tongue gently and spat out a drop of essence blood. Under the enhancement of the incantation, that drop of essence blood formed a blood-colored light barrier that enveloped the palace lord's surroundings. The Blood Crow Palace's lord stepped into the sea of bones. After a few steps, the sea of bones seemed to have sensed something, and waves of bones surged. Countless white bones leaped up from the ground, condensing into powerful white bone beasts in midair. They were ferocious and terrifying, and mysterious flames leaped from the holes in their skulls. Roar! A series of roars could be heard from the sea of bones, causing the weather to change. The Blood Crow King, who was standing at the edge of the sea of bones, was so frightened that his legs turned to jelly. With his cultivation, he could clearly feel the terrifying aura emanating from these skeletal beasts. Any one of these white-boned ferocious beasts could easily tear him to pieces if they rushed out. Surrounded by white-boned ferocious beasts, the Blood Crow Palace's lord continued forward with a calm expression. Those white-bone beasts glared at the palace lord and carefully identified the blood mist on the latter's body. After hesitating for a long time, they gradually dispersed and returned to the sea of bones, returning to peace. The moment the palace lord released his secret skill to check on Su Zimo's whereabouts, at the end of the sea of bones, at the foot of a godly mountain, Su Zimo's eyes shone with a faint green color as he felt a sharp pain in his mind. Immediately after, Su Zimo's vision blurred and he caught sight of the blood-robed young man who had died in his hands smiling sinisterly at him once more. The pain and illusion disappeared in a flash. Before long, there was a commotion in the sea of bones behind him, as though someone had barged in. "They chased me all the way here?" Su Zimo's expression was terrible. Initially, he thought that the primordial forest alone would be enough to stop the pursuers behind him. But now, it seemed like the other party had still entered the sea of bones. Right now, there were only two possibilities. If the other party had the ability to cross the sea of bones, he would definitely die. The second possibility was that the white bone beasts in the sea of bones killed all the pursuers behind him. Su Zimo did not dare to take the risk. Su Zimo looked at the rope that was tied around his body and struggled slightly. However, he realized that there were no signs of loosening at all. Su Zimo sneered internally and burst forth with his blood chi. Rumble! Boom! Boom! His blood surged within his body and a rich demonic chi burst forth. His flesh was filled and his tendons trembled as Su Zimo's body expanded. Buzz! The demon-suppressing rope shone brightly in a resplendent manner, suppressing Su Zimo's blood chi instantly. Su Zimo's expression changed as he grunted dully. The demon-suppressing rope did not loosen. Instead, it dug into Su Zimo's flesh and blood seeped out, dyeing his green robes red. Hurriedly, Su Zimo calmed his blood chi and allowed his body to return to normal. The wounds on his body caused by the demon-suppressing rope were nothing much. They were merely superficial wounds. Given Suzimo's powerful regeneration capabilities, he would be able to recover quickly. However, how he was going to break free was a tricky problem. Suzimo could not possibly wait here foolishly for the gray-robed cultivator to return and help him undo the demon-suppressing rope. By then, he would probably be a dead man. An idea flashed through Suzimo's mind. Since he could not break free in a head-on clash, he might as well use tendons and bones transformation. A series of crackling sounds could be heard from Suzimo's body as his tendons and bones rang together. Suzimo's body shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, Suzimo's body shrunk to a height of only a meter. He was extremely short. However, to Suzimo's shock, the demon-suppressing rope changed as well and shrunk continuously. It was still wrapped tightly around Suzimo's body and he could not break free at all. That was the power of the demon-suppressing rope. That was because demon beasts could change their appearances after cultivating their inner cores. No matter how huge a demon beast was, they could take on a human form. However, once they were bound by the demon-suppressing rope, they would not be able to break free no matter how they transformed. Suzimo was at his wits' end. Right then, Night Spirit closed in and extended its sharp claws that shone with a cold glint. It hooked onto a section of the rope and tore at it repeatedly. A moment later, the demon-suppressing rope snapped. The moment the rope snapped, the glow on the demon-suppressing rope dimmed and it fell from Suzimo's body. Suzimo was delighted. "Yeah!" Night Spirit called out hurriedly and turned back, sprinting up the mountain. Suzimo followed hurriedly. Chapter 237. The gray-robed cultivator tiptoed through the forest, looking nervous and sneaky. He held a folding fan in one hand and a metal rod that was as thick as a finger in the other. At the top of the metal rod, there was a thin needle that spun continuously, guiding the direction. After walking for a while, the gray-robed cultivator would stop in his tracks and wait for the needle at the top of the metal rod to fix on a certain direction before continuing in that direction. Along the way, the gray-robed cultivator did not move quickly. Is this old man's earth spirit ruler reliable? It spins around without a fixed direction. The gray-robed cultivator grumbled as he walked. On the other side, Night Spirit brought Suzimo through the forest of the Godly Mountain at an extremely fast speed. As Night Spirit sprinted, his nose twitched as though he was sniffing something as they walked further and further on the Godly Mountain. A long time later, Night Spirit arrived before a gigantic cave and stopped. Suzimo raised his head and looked at the cave with a shocked expression. His mouth was agape and he was speechless for a long time. The size of the cave had completely exceeded his imagination. Standing before the entrance of the cave, Suzimo felt like an ant. Standing before the majestic palace, he felt incomparably small. Who was it that carved out such a gigantic cave in the Godly Mountain? There were no signs of it being carved out by axes at the edges of the cave. Such methods could be considered as uncanny workmanship. What was the use of such a gigantic cave? Grr! Night Spirit bit Suzimo's sleeves and continued tugging at him, indicating for him to hurry into the cave. Taking a deep breath of air, Suzimo could not help but turn back before entering the cave. That single glance caused Suzimo's gaze to freeze and he could not shift it away. The gigantic cave was halfway up the mountain. Standing there, Suzimo looked down at the sea of bones from above and his vision was naturally wider. Standing halfway up the mountain, one could vaguely see 2 rows of stone pillars juxtaposed in the sea of bones. The top of the stone pillars was almost at the same level as the middle of the mountain. From this, one could see how tall the stone pillars were. The top of the 2 rows of stone pillars were bent towards the middle and embedded into a huge and thick beam. The beam was covered with barbs and was even thicker than the stone pillars. What is this? Suzimo's eyes flashed with doubt. He had a feeling that the combination of these stone pillars and beams was like something. After pondering for a while, Suzimo had no clue, so he followed Night Spirit into the cave. At the same time, Blood Crow Palace's lord walked out of the sea of bones safely and heaved a sigh of relief. Blood Crow Palace's lord did not move at all. Focusing his senses, he could not help but scoff coldly. To think that they're still escaping. I want to see where you can run to today. Following the guidance of the blood curse, the palace lord sped towards the divine mountain. Before long, A figure appeared in front of the gigantic cave halfway up the mountain. Wearing gray robes, he held a folding fan in one hand and an earth spirit ruler in the other. The old man didn't lie to me. Although this earth spirit ruler is a little slow, it didn't make a mistake. I've really found it. Looking at the gigantic cave before him, the gray-robed cultivator could not help but chuckle in delight. If it's meant to be, it will be. If it's not meant to be, don't force it. Shaking his head, the gray-robed cultivator waved his folding fan and muttered gleefully as he walked into the cave. Suzimo had long noticed that ever since he stepped foot into the primordial ruin, Night Spirit's state was different from usual. He was a little excited and nervous. This was the first time such complicated emotions had appeared on Night Spirit. Back when Hake Dojin died, he did not specify whether Night Spirit came from the primordial ruin or the ancient ruin. Suzimo had once suspected that Night Spirit might have some sort of connection with the primordial ruin. Or perhaps, he could boldly speculate that Night Spirit came from the primordial ruin. After all, throughout his observations, Night Spirit's behavior was way too unusual. The cave was extremely spacious and was almost unobstructed. After a long time, the man and beast finally arrived at the deepest part of the cave. At the end of the cave, there was a grayish-white oval object that was as tall as a person. Suzimo was dumbfounded as he muttered to himself in disbelief. That's an egg. What sort of demon beast would give birth to such a gigantic egg? Arriving before the gigantic egg, Suzimo reached out to touch it and feel it. There were no patterns on the egg at all. This meant that it had not been born for long, at most a month. In that case, the phenomenon that many cultivators witnessed a month ago should have been caused by the birth of this demon beast egg. Suzimo recalled everything he knew about the demon beast egg. A moment later, Suzimo still could not figure out what sort of demon beast could give birth to such a gigantic and frightening egg. The Night Spirit slithered up Suzimo's clothes and arrived at Suzimo's chest in a few moments, blinking its beady eyes in a flaunting manner. Suzimo frowned in deep thought as he looked at the egg before him. He had a feeling that he would be able to get an answer if he connected all the pieces of information along the way. Stone pillars, beams, cave, egg. Suddenly a thought flashed through Suzimo's mind. At the thought of that possibility, Suzimo could not help but be shocked. Initially, Suzimo was puzzled when he saw the gray stone pillars in the Sea of Bones. Why were there so many stone pillars in the Sea of Bones? Furthermore, the surface of those stone pillars was as smooth as jade. Why were there no traces of time left on them after so many years since the primordial era? What sort of stone could be so tough? It was only at this moment that Suzimo came to a realization. Those were not stone pillars at all. They were skeletons. The skeletons of an existence that was once incomparably strong. Those stone pillars that were arranged in 2 rows were actually the ribs of that powerful living being. The beam in the middle, which was even thicker and full of barbs, was the spine of this creature. It was precisely because they were skeletons that they appeared in the Sea of Bones. The cave that he was in right now should have been created by the race of that terrifying living being. What sort of a living being could possess such a frightening body? Although its flesh had already rotted after so many years of death, there were no traces left on its bones. They were as smooth as jade and did not decay at all. What was its cultivation realm when it was alive? A primordial being. To think that a primordial being that was already extinct in Tianhuang mainland would be hidden here. If he was not wrong, the gigantic egg before him should have been created by such a primordial being. At that thought, Suzimo could not help but gulp. Piak. Suddenly a crisp sound reverberated through the cave. Suzimo's pupils constricted. The Night Spirit sprawled before his chest had actually reached out with its claws and pierced the gigantic egg before it. Chapter 238. Night Spirit. Suzimo was speechless. Even though the Night Spirit had not been born for a long time, it was extremely intelligent. Be it its stunning performance in killing the Jin Dan realm spirit demon in Dongling Valley, or its actions after entering the primordial ruin, it was enough to prove that Night Spirit was extraordinary. However, this time round Suzimo realized that Night Spirit was in trouble. Furthermore, it was a fatal disaster. It was clear that the egg before him had just been born. In other words, There was a high chance that the unknown primordial life form that laid the egg was nearby. Even though he had not witnessed the terror of the primordial life form personally, he could tell through the forest and sea of bones outside. A single finger from such a terrifying existence was enough to crush him into minced meat. "Hia!" Night Spirit called out softly, as though it wanted Suzimo to hug it. Suzimo's heart was in a mess as he hugged Night Spirit instinctively. Night Spirit craned its neck and only released its claws when it was in front of the gigantic egg. A small hole appeared on the surface of the eggshell, and golden yellow egg juice flowed out of it. It was sparkling and translucent with multicolored light, sparkling and dazzling. Night Spirit opened its mouth hurriedly and sucked at the hole on the eggshell. Gulp! Gulp! Night Spirit gulped down mouthfuls of juice. "Why, you ate it?" Suzimo's eyes widened in disbelief as he watched everything unfold. Instinctively, Suzimo wanted to drag Night Spirit away. However, on second thought, even if he took Night Spirit away now, he had already caused a huge disaster. It was clear that the egg was not going to survive. Furthermore, ever since Night Spirit was born, Suzimo, Monkey, Linghu and Little Crane had tried their best to prepare all sorts of food for it. However, Night Spirit did not seem to be interested. Night Spirit did not touch the flesh of wild beasts, ordinary spirit beasts and spirit demons at all. Night Spirit would only try to eat the flesh of ancient remnant beasts. During this period of time, Night Spirit's body did not grow much, and was only slightly larger than before. Its skin was a little rough with faint ripples. It was rare to see Night Spirit so fond of the egg juice. It looked intoxicated and was even gulping it down greedily. Suzimo's heart softened as he sighed. Forget it, let it eat its fill. The egg juice entered Night Spirit's stomach continuously and the shell turned transparent. One could see the speed at which Night Spirit was gulping down the egg juice. Under Suzimo's gaze, the Night Spirit's before it could stop. This demonic beast egg was as tall as a person. How old was Night Spirit? If he had not witnessed it for himself, Suzimo would not have been able to imagine how Night Spirit's small and skinny body could contain so much egg juice. Night Spirit's stomach was so bloated that it was almost like an airbag. It swayed gently and let out the sound of flowing water. Night Spirit looked at the egg before it with glowing eyes and licked its lips. "Aren't you afraid of bursting?" Suzimo shook his head and scolded in amusement. However, it made sense. An opportunity as such would probably never appear again. It was no wonder why Night Spirit was so gluttonous. "Since you're done eating, let's hurry and retreat. Let's see if we can escape." Suzimo had a feeling that the shattering of the egg might have alarmed the terrifying existence in the primordial ruin. "Hia!" Night Spirit cried out. The moment Night Spirit opened its mouth, it spat out balls of light that were bedazzling and dazzling. The glow contained extremely rich and pure life essence. Suzimo shuddered. His body was nourished by the glow, and he could clearly sense all sorts of strange changes happening in his body. Night Spirit shut its mouth hurriedly and gestured before pointing to the demon beast egg before it. "You want me to eat the rest?" Suzimo understood what Night Spirit meant and was shocked. Night Spirit nodded hurriedly, indicating that the egg juice was the most delicious thing and urging Suzimo to eat it quickly. Suzimo was a little hesitant. Night Spirit gestured again, indicating that it could no longer eat and it would be a pity to leave the rest of the egg juice here. Suzimo grit his teeth and made up his mind. Since he had already gotten himself into big trouble, what was there to worry about? Suzimo placed Night Spirit in his embrace and walked forward. Hugging the gigantic demon beast egg with both hands, he faced the small hole and started gulping down mouthfuls. "It's a little fishy and not very delicious." A thought flashed through Suzimo's mind. A cool and smooth liquid flowed through his throat and into his stomach. Boom! Instantly, Suzimo felt as though his body was about to explode. The energy contained in the liquid was much greater than Suzimo had imagined. The moment the energy entered his stomach, it exploded instantly and turned into a divine light that surged through Suzimo's body, flowing through his limbs and bones. The energy nourished his skin, flesh, tendons, bones, and marrow as well as Suzimo's organs. At this moment, Suzimo realized that the liquid in the egg was definitely a great tonic for him. In fact, it was many times more effective than the inner cores of demon beasts. If he could digest all the energy in the liquid, he could even break through to the greater success of organs refinement. Opportunity. This was an unimaginably great opportunity. Of course, the premise of all this was that he could escape from this place. Su Zimo gulped down mouthfuls of the liquid. He finally experienced the feeling of reluctance and unsatiation after Night Spirit stopped swallowing. There was probably nothing in this world that could be purer than the energy in the liquid without any impurities. The energy was way too strong. It rampaged through Su Zimo's body and started spewing out light through his pores. Su Zimo's surroundings were filled with divine light and mist. In the haze he looked like a god. Su Zimo knew that the energy contained in the liquid was extremely rare. Taking a deep breath of air, Su Zimo hurriedly closed his pores and locked in the essence chi within his body. However, the energy was way too dense. Given Su Zimo's physique, it was difficult for him to contain it within a short period of time. Su Zimo's eyes, ears, nostrils and mouth shone with a resplendent glow that surged with essence chi. It was a frightening sight. Under the pressure of that energy, Su Zimo's eyes shone with a faint green color. Before long, the evil energy hidden in Su Zimo's eyes was forced out by the pure energy in the liquid. That evil energy was left in Su Zimo's body by the blood-robed youth using the blood slave art. 2 drops of faint green liquid dripped down from the corner of Su Zimo's eyes and landed on the ground. They did not dissipate and shone with a faint light. Su Zimo was delighted. He had not expected that the liquid in the demon beast egg would resolve the hidden danger in his body. This meant that as long as Su Zimo escaped from this place, his pursuers would no longer be able to locate him through any secret skills.